Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I'd like to now declare open this hearing of the Senate's Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Legislation Committee's inquiry into the Defence Force Discipline Amendment, RCDVS Implementation and Related Measures Number 1, Bill 2026. I want to begin by acknowledging the custodians of the land on which we are meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. The committee will be conducting today's hearing via video conference, and as chair of the committee, I'm joined by the Deputy Chair, Senator Collins, and other senators of the committee will also join today's hearing. These are public proceedings being video streamed live via the Parliament's website, and a Hansard transcript is being made. I want to remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. I want to remind senators of their obligations under the Behaviour Code for Australian parliamentarians to treat all witnesses with dignity, courtesy, fairness and respect. Remind committee members and witnesses that you are or who are appearing via video conference and who are not speaking to please mute their microphones. Now, on that note, we'll move on to our first witness of the morning. And I'd like to welcome the Honourable Peter Tinley, AM, National President of RSL Australia. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Committee. Good morning, Chair.
I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. Now, for the Hansard record, could I ask that you state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee today?
Of course, Peter Charles Tinley, National President, RSL Australia.
Now, I'll invite you to make a short opening statement if you have one, otherwise we'll go to questions. Did you have an opening statement this morning?
If I can, thanks, Chair.
Sure, please.
Thank you for inviting me to appear to represent RSL Australia. I'd like to restate RSL Australia's strong support for the bill and the importance of the proposed amendments in addressing the recommendations of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide by modernising the Defence Force's responses to sexual assaults and related offences in line with community expectations. The submission points to opportunities to improve the bill by strengthening procedural fairness provisions and clearer management of discipline during combat and conflict operations. Most importantly, however, is that changing the law is, on its own, not enough. The bill will not meet its aims without an accompanying policies and cultural support within and throughout the ADF to inform the attitudes and procedures long before the formal disciplinary provisions come into play. It is the men and women in leadership positions who model language, behaviour and attitudes, setting the expectations for standards across the forces. Culture is shaped by their confidence, knowledge and understanding when responding to suspicions of allegations or misconduct and in supporting victims and survivors. RSL Australia supports the reforms in the bill, while recognising its success will depend on the cultural change that is driven through policy directions and guidance, communications, training and education. Outcomes should be measured, reviewed, evaluated and continuously improved. I look forward to the opportunity to expand on RSL Australia's position by answering any of your questions.
Okay, kick off and just ask. It's a couple and see if colleagues didn't have any other questions. Oh, g'day. Good morning, Senator Lambie. Good to see you online, mate. Tinley, your submission supports the introduction of the summary contravention scheme. What have been some of the consequences of not having this sort of middle tier in the discipline system?
I think the biggest consequence is people haven't had to give regard to a range of things, not least of which is the sensitivities around handling a complaint and seeing it through, and also providing procedural fairness to an accused, of course, but also fairness to the allegation and those making the allegations.
And your submission also calls for review and evaluation to avoid the inadequate implementation that has also followed historical reviews in defence. Do you have any confidence that the newly established DVSC will improve the Royal Commission's implementation?
Well, we all have hope that it can. We've seen various levels of, in other areas, levels of scrutiny and review, and it's only as good as people want to actually lead the change. And if they don't want to lead the change, we have 1,000 reviews, unless it actually puts somebody in the dock and makes them accountable, and the leadership chain in this case accountable. Then it's going to be just a toothless tiger. We see this in other areas. For example, workplace health and safety. Everybody might remember the 70s and 80s when it was a pretty tough old time, and you might have one safety person in a company. But it wasn't until the laws pulled that piece of legislation, the outcomes they want, into the leadership chain. So the leaders must be responsible. Now we've got industrial manslaughter, for example, as a consequence of some of that, to really lay bare the responsibilities of leaders in this space at all levels.
I appreciate that. So obviously leadership and people matter, quite frankly. How should our committee then evaluate the success of these reforms, in your opinion?
I think it'd be. I would actually expect, and this is just speculation now, but I would actually expect an increase in the number of complaints, quite frankly. I think in my 25 years of soldering, many things that I saw go on never went reported for a range of reasons that many on the committee would understand. I would think there'd be an increase, and that's really important. I accept that there might be a surge in these things, and that is actually a positive thing, despite the fact of the subject matter we're talking about. And then that will lay bare those opportunities to actually review the effectiveness of each and every one of those cases.
Okay. All right, excellent. Now, I'll just see if the Deputy Chair has any questions.
Thank you, Chair.
And then I'll come to Senator Lambie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr Tinley. Look, the bill introduces a new power to suspend a member from duty if they're under investigation by civilian or overseas authorities for a civil court offence. Your submission highlights that the bill allows for suspension without a threshold of reasonable suspicion. And given that suspension can actually have an impact on mental health and lasting consequences, does the RSL believe that the current safeguard, which only requires a formal investigation to be underway, is insufficient to prevent the system from becoming a risk factor for suicide?
Well, we always have to be alive to each of these. These are highly sensitive matters, both the allegation and if it's found to be proven as well. So the arrangements around it, again, are a leadership challenge to make sure that everybody is treated appropriately and fairly. But in terms of the safeguards, we have to rely on commanders in the field to actually do the right thing. So if they suspend, when I say commanders in the field, I think commanders in their roles, if they suspend somebody who is accused, they've got to have a fairly good sense of what's going on and what's required, because sometimes it's in the best interest to remove the person from the workplace. So they're going to have to make those calls as they see it in front of them. We must not take the flexibility of leaders to lead and the commanders to command as a result of over legislation.
And what about the unintended consequences of not having a mandatory review of these suspensions? I know that your submission says that there should be reviews within 2 to 3 weeks of the suspension being put in place. Do you think there'll be unintended consequences if they don't have a review?
I think that's hence why it's in the submission. Everything should be reviewable, and I think that review should also occur outside of that chain of command. So somebody can actually have a fresh pair of eyes on it to make sure it is in accordance with the framework and in accordance with the law, of course, but the cascading set of policies that need to accompany this, as I said in the opening submission, that need to accompany this have to be also available and see that they're applied. Those policies or the consequential impacts of doing this change, this amendment, is fundamentally important to have those policies follow on.
Okay. Now, the bill requires that the Defence Mental Health Tribunal be composed of specialist medical and legal practitioners. And if you are in a high-tempo, disconnected conflict zone, deployment or conflict zone, how realistic do you think it is to assemble a specialised tribunal? And do you think this could impact the suffering of members if you can't pull that together?
Well, the first thing sorry, I beg your pardon. The first thing we'd be saying is that the exigencies of the environment they're in, their operational environment, must come first. So the combat effectiveness of any unit and its current posture, if they're in the field, is the first priority, because that involves the safety and effectiveness of everyone else in the unit. If they're in a deployed situation that is, very difficult, I'm thinking of a submarine now, or some other deployed, isolated unit, then it's going to be a real challenge. And they have to make some choices, and the leadership needs to make choices in those circumstances about how they're going to create procedural fairness and make sure everyone's safe. So it's not an easy question. It's a knotty problem.
Mm. So your submission also states that changing a heading does not change a culture. So beyond the, we're talking here about changing the term malingering to a one-word term, malingering, to a 12-word definition, which, as the explanatory memorandum states, doesn't actually change a thing. The definition remains the same. Changing a heading, you said, does not change a culture. So what unintended consequences might arise if the ADF focuses on these legislative label changes without the leadership commitment? I know that you touched on that before, but can you just expand on that a little bit more, please, in relation to this change?
Well, again, I come back to this point. The black letter of any particular law is only as good as it's interpreted and applied. So this is a challenge for the leadership. And the other thing is, it's a challenge for the whole of Defence to understand the role. Let's face it, the most affected group in the veterans community are women. And right now we're seeing a healthy growth in female enlistment. We're about 21% of the ADF is women. In the 580,000 community that make up the veterans community, there's about 13%. So you can see where it's tracking. And certainly us at the RSL have a very, very keen interest in this, because that's the future of our membership. So how they're treated in service is fundamentally important. So we're very keen to make sure that, I'm going to call it straight out, men need to take responsibility here. Men are the majority of the leadership across the ADF and in society, and this is a whole of community problem. The ADF didn't invent sexual harassment. It came in and got enlisted, and then people decided to act in behaviours that are outside the culture of the ADF. So I think it's very much important that the example that leaders set is one that's carried right through all the ranks, and everybody must. You can train this. We saw this. I come from Western Australia. We see it in the resource sector. They want to keep putting rules in about putting gloves and glasses on. If you have a rules-based approach to this and not a cultural behavioural change approach to these sort of things, then you're only going to get the same result every time. And I draw Senators' attention to a report that was done in Western Australia called Enough is Enough. It was an inquiry into the sexual harassment and violence in mine sites. And some of the responses from the mining companies were quite frankly outrageous. In other words, giving women panic alarms to carry around, extra strong locks on their doors. I mean, please. So that's not a cultural change. That's just another band-aid. So there's plenty of examples outside the ADF that can be drawn upon to actually give clues to the cultural requirements that need to happen to get a better and safer workplace for women.
Okay, so you've also called for mandatory training for all commanding officers and summary authorities before the new scheme commences. Now, we have seen in the past weeks, a tendency for the Department of Defence to contract out rather than delegate within. Do you see, the Defence's new bill as more of an opportunity to contract out on these changes, on the training of within, and what do you think will be the impact on the application of these new laws?
Yeah, I think contracting out in this particular way, you can't contract cultural change. What you can do is lead. And so the training is fundamentally important, so people know exactly what the requirements are. But there's a really good opportunity here. There are veterans who are no longer in service who have an abundant amount of experience. So they're part of that culture. Why can't we and the ADF look to bring in some of the newly retired or recently retired leadership at all levels and create a training team that actually demonstrates in a cultural competence sort of way what the behaviours would be. So rather than just outsourcing to one of the consulting firms, that's a waste of time.
Waste of time and also probably a waste of money. It's saying that the explanatory memorandum states that the bill's measures will have minor internal resourcing impacts that will be absorbed by Defence, and given the budgetary constraints that they're facing, no doubt it will mean cuts in other areas. So if you're contracting out, it's an extraordinary amount of money that you'll be spending on that. So you've also recommended a robust monitoring framework and annual reporting of aggregate data to Parliament. So why do you believe that the current oversight mechanisms are insufficient to monitor these specific Royal Commission reforms?
Well, the same reason across all of those 122 recommendations. Somebody needs to provide an independent report, particularly to Parliament, that gives an honest assessment about the effectiveness of these things. It can't be done from internally. Self-assessment is not a model that works. We know that. So I think it stands on its own merits, this idea that get an external review, get people that know what they're looking at to actually report on this honestly. We do it in other areas, certainly right across the, in Indigenous policy as well. You know, the report to Parliament happens. Why wouldn't we shy away from it? Why would we want to shy away from it?
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Senator Collins. Senator Lambie, you've got the call.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear me properly?
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Good morning, Mr. Tinley. First of all, can you just tell me whether I notice, unless I'm getting this wrong, but on Defence's, but on the list here for Defence, mine's got 37 witnesses. I've got a very similar bill, but mine's more hardcore, of course, because we've been waiting for 15 years for these changes, as you would know. Did the RSL bring in a legal expert on this to go through that bill? Were you able to afford that at all, or is this just who did you get to pull the bill apart?
My policy team here in Canberra and those that are around the states, I should say, particularly we relied on people like James Weston, who is a lawyer in Victoria, from the staff there. He's been an outstanding help in this. But we wanted to go beyond law here. We wanted to go into behaviours, and we want to go into that whole grey area of what's good leadership.
Okay, yeah, I get where you're coming from. That's okay. I've picked up the slack on the other one, and I know James, and he does a very good job down there, and his hands are very full because he's so good. I guess my other question is, the bill lets the Director of Military Prosecutions delegate any or all of their powers under Section 87 of the DFDA. Does the RSL have any concerns about such broad delegation powers?
Well, we've seen them in other areas, but I defer to your experience in what you've seen in your career about the effectiveness of that delegation. I'd want to see very good reasons why they feel the need to delegate, but I'm not quite across all that one.
Okay. All right, we'll stick on that. I am worried about the bill, to be honest with you, because it still doesn't spell out to me that if we know that there's now 30 or 40 military personnel ringing up Lifeline most days, apparently, which is absolutely shameful in itself, that tells me they don't trust the military system to go forward. Now, we have a gap. They can go and put all this legislation in, but we have a gap on who we can report to and who we can trust and what they're going to do with that information. It's extremely scattered. We have this thing called Sempro, which I'm sure you're aware of, which has done nothing during its time set up. That was their setup to fix the abuse system, which has only got worse in the 15 years I've looked at it. So my problem is it's the reporting procedures, all right, and this is where you'll change the culture. I just do not see how this changes without that bottom line of who do we report to? Do we go to service police? Why do we not have independent? You can't trust the military on the military justice system anymore. That's been called out in the last few months and it's pretty sad. It was called out in the Royal Commission. So with these sort of offences, especially the abuse offences, I'm not happy that the military still got that from that chain of command right from the bottom all the way up. And I would not feel comfortable still, myself, if it was me, going into reporting this into the military. I have a real problem with that because they haven't proved themselves. So we have a gap in the system to start with. I want to know who I'm reporting to this, who I can trust, that's going to get this job done. So I know that the perpetrator is being removed from that unit or doing whatever, and that's going to happen fairly bloody quickly because military does not move quickly. I just don't see how this bill or any other bill is going to work until they get this foundation right from the bottom.
I have a lot of sympathy for your empathy for your the sentiment there, Senator, and I would support it. But I would say, at what point do we say enough is enough? Why do we need other? I get why we do. But why would we want to bolt on another bureaucracy for people to feel safe? What's wrong with the current leadership?
Maybe that's the teaching maybe that ADFA. Maybe it's ADFA that needs to go because I haven't seen anything good come out of that bloody place since it was opened in the 80s.
Well, my son's coming out next year. So.
Yeah, I understand that, but they can all go to RMC. There's nothing good coming out of that bloody place. As a matter of fact, since that Skype scandal, nothing has been done still. Well, nothing has been done. There was a big abuse case there only a few months ago as well. And if this is what's coming out of our offices that are supposed to be at the top, then you have to wonder why the culture won't change.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to start where you start. I agree with you. And we've seen some movement, but in my time, just thinking of some of the behaviours that I first saw when I joined in 1980 to where we're now, it's still not good enough. But gosh, if some of those things that happen to this day and age, there'd be all sorts of hell to pay. But it's the chain of command. The chain of command needs to take responsibility for it and fix it. Simple as that.
I think the culture, my bothering is that culture is still a culture of cover-up, and it's not helping anyone, let alone defence. And that's why people aren't joining. They've got it wrong. I don't understand why we've got the highest proportion of officers in the world at nearly 25%, a quarter of our military, and yet our problems are getting worse in defence. That training with those officers is not working, mate. I have no final questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Tinley. Good to see you again.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Senator.
All right. Good on you, Senator. Now, just checking if any other senators had any questions. Silence. I'll take it no. On that note, Mr. Tinley, you are free to go.
Oh, actually.
Hang on.
Sorry.
I've got to get to the war memorial. Hurry up.
Wait there. No, just wait. War memorial can wait. The unknown soldier can wait. Just one tick. This mental, I am a bit concerned about the Defence Mental Health Tribunal's key operating rules. There is no. I was just wondering if the RSL could have a good look at that. Obviously, my bill is going to be looked at as well. I'll have legal experts on mine.
Yep.
And there'll be more submissions coming from them, which is not really what I'm seeing on this one, which is really disappointing. But that's because the government doesn't reach out. Once again, if you want something fixed, then we need all the experts at the table. This is where they're going wrong. They're still not learning, and we're sitting in abuse now, and they're still not learning. Didn't even try to get out there and get those legal experts in because they don't want to be called out, and it's really embarrassing for defence. So if you could just have a look at that Defence Mental Health Tribunal, what the hell does that look like? What does that look like for somebody with mental health issues? I'm really worried about that.
All right.
And the other thing is, you guys only had 3 weeks. I mean, how does the government possibly believe you've had 3 weeks that you're supposed to get legal experts over a bill that's nearly 200 pages long, give or take? I find it disgusting, and it's really disrespectful for every veteran out there. Once again, thanks, Mr. Tinley.
Good on you. Thanks, Senators.
Are we out, Jackie? Just checking.
She's good. She's good to go.
It's good to go, Peter. All right,
Thank
on that note, thanks a lot. Enjoy your day. Thank you for making time. And if there were any questions that were taken on notice, please provide a response by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, the 21st of July. Now, we're going to move on to our next witness. And I'd like to welcome Professor Ben Wadham, the Director of Open Door. You there, Professor?
I am here. Just work out this WebEx. Here we go.
Excellent.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now I'm trying to see where you are actually. Oh, there you are. Hello, good morning. Thank you for your time today. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses given evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, could I ask that you state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Professor Benjamin Allen Wadham, Director of Open Door, improving the wellbeing of veterans and their families at Flinders University.
Thank you very much for that, Professor. Now, did you have an opening statement that you'd like to make this morning, Professor?
Yes.
Okay.
Just bear with me.
It's okay, take your time. I'll invite you to make an opening statement at the conclusion. I'll hand over to senators to ask questions.
Okay. So I'm ready to go up.
Excellent. Fire away.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to appear. It's my first appearance before a Senate inquiry, so...
we'll be gentle.
Thank you. Well, you go for it. We'll get through it. Yeah, as I said, I'm the Director of Open Door at Flinders University. I'm a veteran. I've been researching in this space since 2003 at least. My first submission to a government inquiry was in the HMAS Swan sexual harassment back in 1994. So I have a long-standing history in this. My evidence today is not that these reforms are unnecessary, although my submission has a critical element to it. My concern is that we are focusing on procedure at the expense, at the belief that it's transformation. I think that we're focusing on what is visible in the disciplinary system and not paying enough attention to what the Royal Commission told us, and that is that there are administrative and also authority or command issues that sit behind these reforms, which I'm not convinced that we are addressing effectively at this point. So I gave testimony to the Royal Commission on day one, and these were some of the points that I made, is that we need to focus on the institutional elements of defence. We don't see veteran suicide as simple individual pathology, that harm to veterans and their families can come from just the way in which a military operates. It's not always malice or bad apples or bad actors. It's the way in which that institution operates in order to achieve the role that it has, and obviously it has a very unique role. So it's shaped by institutional conditions, command culture, abuse of authority, military sexual violence, administrative practices, institutional betrayal and failures of transition. These are all the factors that I've seen in the over several hundred interviews that I've done with veterans over the last 10 or so years, 15 years. So it's consistent with my argument that in my submission that suicidality is produced not only through individual pathology or deployment trauma, but through command culture, which leads to institutional abuse, administrative violence, gendered power, stigma and transition failure, not to mention post-service issues around the way in which DVA can manage claims and conditions. We'll note that the IGADF has just released its weaponisation inquiry, which I sat upon, and it has used the term administrative violence, albeit in a much more narrow sense, again, going back to procedure as opposed to looking at institutional culture. So many of the submissions that I read for this today are focusing whether the machinery of military justice can be improved, and as I'm trying to say, my concern is slightly different. Overall, I commend the bill, but I'm interested in whether these reforms can change the institutional conditions that contributed to the need of the reform in the first place, and certainly that's what the Royal Commission showed us. So let's try and retain the spirit of the Royal Commission. The bill contains many worthwhile measures. I'm military justice is not simply a legal system, it's also a system through which authority is exercised, trust is produced or undermined, and well-being shaped. And my concern is that the recommendations are implemented, we do not lose sight of the Royal Commission's broader lesson that veteran suicide is shaped not only by individual factors, but also by the institutions in which people serve. So for me, the key question, I guess, is whether these reforms will modernise military justice, or whether they'll contribute to changing the institutional conditions that produce that harm. Thank you.
Thanks. Well done. That was excellent. Thank you very much, Professor, for that. I'll just kick off with a couple of questions and then I'll hand over to my other colleagues. I did note in your submission, you say that you welcome the establishment of the Defence Mental Health Tribunal. How do you expect, I guess, this reform to improve outcomes for ADF members whose mental health, I guess, intersects with the disciplinary proceedings?
Yeah, I support the Mental Health Tribunal overall, but just with some caution, and that is creating a mental health tribunal. The tribunal can make orders relating to detention, care, treatment or release for people who are unfit to plead or not responsible because of mental impairment. This is potentially more humane than older punitive approaches, but it still risks treating harm as an individual clinical problem. And the Royal Commission showed that, as I said, that mental injury is often shaped by institutional conditions. So I think maybe the Royal Commission didn't simply discover mental illness, it discovered mental illness, it discovered institutional contributors. So wider kind of ideas would be to consider whether the member's condition was materially shaped by command conduct, institutional betrayal, workplace culture, abuse, retaliation, not simply some sort of breakdown in someone's mental health or condition.
Do you see any benefits through these reforms, specifically, or what we've just touched on, about delivering confidence in the military justice system?
I think if it has this wider platform, it does. I think if we continue to consider it in this individualistic way, then it can be seen as another form of controlling and providing authority over people. But as I said, I support it in principle because it's another support network, if done well, that can support veterans in that space.
What do you also see as reforms that are required for this tribunal, the Mental Health Tribunal, to better support veterans, particularly their mental health?
Well, my focus is largely on the administrative and authority elements to this. So sorry if they're not
That's okay.
Discrete, but I think we need to understand where the mental health is coming from. And if we see it as simply coming out of, say, something like deployment trauma, and then we don't recognise that deployment trauma is exacerbated by the way in which, say, for example, psychological screening is all conducted when someone returns, or how a company tries to deal with a unit of a battalion tries to deal with a company full of men with trauma-related issues, maybe self-medicating, or maybe having performance issues, then we're not going to be supporting them. So the tribunal has to address some of these broader cultural issues, such as command conduct, that I've seen that directly affect veterans when they get back from overseas, which can lead then to institutional betrayal, which creates moral injury, which is an overwhelming force in veteran self-harm and suicidality. Workplace culture, the place of abuse, the way in which retaliation sometimes happens. I've seen that happen through our interviews with veterans that have had deployment trauma, self-harm issues, self-medication, and then rather than being supported are terminated. And then that leads to transition stress. So the Mental Health Tribunal must recognise those broader conditions.
Just lastly, in your submission, you touch on about the historical stigma and justice. And I was hoping that you might be able to maybe expand on it for us a bit more, noting some of the comments that you've made here. An important step, but is this an area that you'd like to see a lot more work in the future?
Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
So in your submission, you talk about historical stigma justice, about the historical homosexual service offences, and there's a long overdue recognition that defence once criminalised identity rather than wrongdoing. I was just hoping you might be able to expand on that for us a bit more from your comments that you have made in your submission.
Well, I think I was serving in '92 when that was overturned, again through our research, and I also would mention the research of people like Noah Reisman, we have seen that stigma has left people that joined the military to provide service feeling marginalised, disaffected and dislocated, giving them long-term life harm. So 35 years on, recognising that criminalising their identity was inappropriate form of harm or adversity is one form of reconciliation, I think, one form of supporting those people to recognise that there was nothing wrong with who they were, that service counts, and that there should be no ongoing legacy of their choices, their sexual choices.
And I suspect not just sexual choices, but even people of certain race as well.
Absolutely. The Australian Defence Force or any military is very strong on creating a sense of us and them. The masculine, in my research, we talk about three elements or three pillars to the military. The martial element, that's why we're there, to seek out, to close in and kill the enemy. The fraternal element, that's important for esprit de corps and unit cohesion. And the exceptionalist element, which is the fact that we do a very unique job. That sometimes, and the ADF have recognised this in their Beyond Compliance report in 2011, sometimes that creates very strong military forces, sometimes it produces massive exclusion, and that exclusion is lifelong. I can tell you that from our research, it's lifelong sense of exclusion, a lifelong sense of institutional betrayal, much harder to resolve than PTSD from my experience.
Thank you very much, Professor. Now, I'll just see if other colleagues have questions. Deputy Chair, did you have any questions?
None from me, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Senator Lambie. Senator Lambie, you have the call.
Thank you. Good morning, Ben. I haven't seen you for a while.
G'day, Jackie.
Apologise.
Yeah, it's one of the hearings, I think, in Melbourne last time.
Yeah. Okay, I just... I want to talk about the Defence mental health. I want to talk about the Mental Health Tribunal, and I heard you say, I think you said a few things on it before. I'm worried about whether it should be required to consider whether Defence itself should command those decisions and those cultures. They have failed miserably for years. I don't know if you know, but I've been working on the Defence Abuse Bill for well over 12 months between me and the drafters, and all of a sudden you get a bill from the government come through, right? So the Defence already knew I was on its butt. That's why it's only doing 3 weeks, and mine's going longer, because I actually have lawyers and that on mine that we can listen to, okay? So I'm bringing in the legal experts, which is really disappointing to have this. So this has just been thrown out of nowhere. They could have done this after the DLA Piper stuff. Yeah. We knew this stuff, then nothing's been done. Then we had the Royal Commission, and we're still, I think 3 years later, outside that Royal Commission, and Defence has finally got off its butt to produce something. They should be absolutely, utterly embarrassed with themselves. So if you think there's going to be culture change in this, this shows me the culture of I will not deal with it until I have to and cover it up by all means. That's what's come out of this for me. So
can I quickly respond to that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, look, on the one hand, I am trying to be supportive and commend this bill, but might be my own naivety. But look, I've seen this myself. I've been, the longest standing researcher in this space from that position, from the research position, not from an advocacy position so much. The Royal Commission told us there were 57 inquiries and over 750 recommendations hadn't been met. Well, now we've got 58 inquiries and 872 recommendations.
And 59 coming up. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing, I guess, is that we're rolling into a procedural approach to addressing this, and we're not looking at the levers and the mechanisms behind that. So we're seeing what's visible. That's defence tribunals and these sorts of discrete facts. We're not focusing on the things that we don't see, which is where commanders use their discretion to make untoward decisions to affect people. Defence try to address the matters themselves. There's recommendation 122 is not that different from the recommendation in 2005 on the effectiveness of Australia's military justice system, which looked at ADFAR, something sitting outside of the chain of command. Defence as an institution, not to critique defence in and of itself, but defence as an institution needs independent scrutiny. If it's left to its own devices, it's ineffective in terms of cultural change.
Well, I thought we would have seen that with the procurement changes where they've been basically told they can't do the job. That's what they should have been told instead of putting it nicely by Minister Conroy. You failed to get the job done even though you're at 40% officers in our military. I think there lays the problem. Too many chiefs, not enough Indians. My problem is with that mental health tribunal, I'm still not clear on it as well. Should it be required to consider whether defence itself, through command decisions, workplace culture or institutional failures, contributed to a member's mental health condition? Now, I'm not sure that is in there. So how can we possibly hold accountability where there's a line there that should be in there and they should be looked at if they have been part of the problem? Still letting them off higher command.
Yeah, I agree. I think I said that in that we're not focusing on command conduct, institutional betrayal, workplace culture, abuse, retaliation, transition, stress, administrative harm. These are the effects that we don't see through procedure and tribunals and structures and whatever. We need to have some visibility on those factors because they're the factors that sit behind someone's mental health or well-being.
Okay, and I just have, in your submission you stated that this bill doesn't go far enough because it doesn't redistribute the power and accountability within defence. Where do you think too much power still sits and who should be exercising greater oversight instead? Any idea? I mean, it's just a discussion. You can throw anything over the table.
Yeah, that's a big question. I have to just sort of precede that with which is something on which I come back to, and that's a conundrum, and that is on the one hand the military is a unique institution that has to conduct a unique job, the prosecution of violence, and I understand that playing around with the organisation can be seen to somehow affect that virulence. However, if an institution is continuing to prosecute harm upon its people, then that is equally an important reason for change. Obviously, power and authority sits largely within the commissioned officer class and within higher levels of command particularly. When something goes wrong, we hear higher levels of command respond to that, but I've yet to see it trickle down or move down through the ranks to have real effects at unit level.
Yeah, I think do we not have we have another officer put in now that's been promoted over the last 12 months to take charge of that, and I don't see anything changed. Nothing has changed whatsoever. Quite frankly, and I don't know, the government hasn't worked this out, but if you don't get a big stick and they're not intimidated of you somewhat, defence is not going to change. Quite frankly, they should just give me the big stick and let me go on those bases because I bet I could get change very bloody quickly between you and I. That's the problem. There is no fear.
Yeah.
Military, the top of those officers have no fear and very little respect for politicians.
I've seen that historically, absolutely.
Yeah,
and
there you go, still the same thing. So that's why we're not going anywhere.
Yeah, I've had defence ministers, 2 or 3 defence ministers over the 20 years ring me to tell me about this phenomenon. And when we saw the Skype affair, that whole history came out of, it's almost like a rivalry. And I followed the discussions. trying to sort of displace it to the authority of the Governor-General at the expense of the Executive Government.
Oh, yeah. How does that work? That was another question.
Yeah.
That Governor-General, I mean, they may not have legal training. You cannot chuck it out to a Governor-General. I mean, what is the government sitting on? I mean, honestly, that's just the most ridiculous thing I have seen yet. And I'm sure the Governor-General does not want that job. How ridiculous. Yeah, this is what happens when you make a fast bill, mate. You chuck those little extras in there. That's how come you know they've done it really quickly without very little consideration.
Well, I did also note the implication of tasers and body cameras, and you and I have been in that core, and that's just looks to me like an add-on.
Do you know, I have no problem with the body cameras. That way that would call out the commanding officers, to be honest with you. You tell me how many incidents in the last 2 years where a service police officer has had to put a veteran down on their ass in uniform on base.
Yeah.
I've never heard of it. Never seen it in my life as military police.
I never would have had to use a taser.
No, I don't understand that. Why would we use a taser on our own? It's bad enough, feeling bad enough for service police booking them.
And do we have the mental health training to be able to make
and
a distinction?
Yeah, to be able to do that. I'm sorry, our service police are not trained at that condition. That is the first thing, and neither is the hierarchy. Yeah.
Correct.
I have no more questions. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Ben, and thank you for all your work.
Thanks, Senator.
Thanks, Senator. Any other senators with questions? If not, we'll release the Professor. Professor, thank you very much for today. You did an excellent job being your first Senate inquiry hearing, so well done. 10 out of 10 from us. Good on you, mate. Yes. And if there's any questions that were taken on notice, if you could provide a response by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, 21st of July. Now, we're going to move along to our next witness, which is Dr. Anna Brooks, who's the Chief Research Officer at Lifeline Australia. Are you there, Anna?
I am. Thank you for having me. Sorry, I'm just trying to start my video.
It's all right. You just get yourself sorted. I've got a few things I need to say, so you sort your IT out. I welcome Dr. Anna Brooks, who's the Chief Research Officer at Lifeline Australia. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses given evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. Now, for the Hansard record, could I ask that you state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today? We can see you on the screen. Hello.
Great. Thank you. I'm well, thank you. My full name is Dr. Anna Brooks. I am the Chief Research Officer at Lifeline Australia.
Now, did you happen to have an opening statement today, Dr. Brooks?
Yes, I'd love to, if that's okay. Thank you.
Please proceed, and then we'll ask members of the committee to ask questions.
Great, thank you. So thank you for having me today. My name is Dr. Anna Brooks, as I just said. I'm the Chief Research Officer at Lifeline Australia. At Lifeline Australia, we welcome the opportunity to contribute to the committee's consideration of this bill. As Australia's leading suicide prevention service provider, we support between 30 and 40 defence-affiliated help seekers each day via our 13 11 14 telephone-based crisis support service. At the outset, 2 brief observations that I did make in the submission, but I think worth repeating. First, data aren't destiny. Population-level suicide statistics help us understand patterns of risk, but don't determine circumstances or the future of any individual person. It's a really important point, particularly when speaking about priority populations. Second, service in the ADF is associated with many strengths and protective factors, including connection, shared purpose, and a strong sense of belonging. And that strengths-based framing is really critical in these conversations. At the same time, evidence shows veterans experience an elevated risk of suicide compared with the broader population, and the Royal Commission's increased our understanding of the factors that contribute to that risk, including impact that systems and institutions have on wellbeing. From our perspective, one of the important findings of that Royal Commission was that involvement in disciplinary processes can itself contribute to distress and suicide risk. And against that backdrop, we support reforms that improve fairness, strengthen protections for victim survivors, reduce barriers to help seeking, and contribute to better wellbeing outcomes for defence personnel and veterans. And finally, we'd like to note the importance of a connected support system. Whilst veteran-specific services are critical, many veterans also seek support through broader community services such as our own and others. Effective suicide prevention therefore requires strong coordination across government, defence, veteran services and the community sector. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, now I might just rotate the call around this time. Did any senators have questions? Senator Collins?
Not from me, thank you, Chair.
No. Senator Lambie? did you have anything your end, Senator Lambie? And then you go, and I'll come back to myself afterwards. You go first. You're on mute at the moment too, Jack.
Gee, Chair, that's no good. You need to hear me.
So that's not like you to be quiet.
I know. Another 7 or 8 weeks I'll be back in that Senate. You'll hear me loud and clear. I'm sure the country will. Thank you so much for coming in. I do know that you pick up that Lifeline does get quite a few calls. They have done for a long time when it comes to veterans. So thank you very much for picking that up. I just wanted to, is there a, are you able to break it down whether they're ringing, are you able to break that 30 or 40 that you get a day into, whether it's a housing issue, or is that your 30 or 40 are actually just, it wouldn't be all legal. Can you split that down on, can you give me a description of what that umbrella looks like on what sort of things they're saying to you?
Thanks, Senator Lambie. Just so I'll speak to it as best I can. We don't necessarily have a really clear breakdown of the topics that are being discussed in those contacts. The 30, just a few bits and pieces, the 30 to 40 contacts each day is, I'm only talking here about the telephone-based service. And of course we have chat and text as well. And within that 13, 11, 14 context, that's a really conservative estimate. So we didn't want to over-egg the omelette. So we made sure that estimate was sort of the minimum that we're confident that we're getting each day. We're getting more sophisticated in terms of how we can actually identify priority groups who are using the services. And I expect that as we get that level of sophistication in doing that piece of work, Senator Lambie, we'll see that it's actually fairly a higher number than the one that we've quoted thus far. But in terms of your question about what ADF affiliated people are using the 13, 11, 14 service for, it's a variety of purposes. Like in terms of topics that people discuss with our crisis supporters, it's often about relationships and relationship breakdowns, but also other major life transitions like job loss. So those big life events, particularly around relationships and employment, are a real key sort of factor for those conversations with our crisis supporter, including for ADF affiliated people. We know also, so when we sort of identified those contacts and drilled down into them a little bit, obviously, observing, the privacy of, people using our services, we know that there's a mixture of people who are using Lifeline as a complement to other services. So they'll talk about, how we're available sort of, 24/7, and so that can fill a gap. But also that for a significant chunk of those people, they're using Lifeline because they don't want to use services that are affiliated with Defence. So they'll say in those conversations that they don't want anything to do with Defence affiliated services. So it's a bit of a mix. Those who are using us as a part of their sort of approach to dealing with mental health and wellbeing, and those who are using us as their go-to because they don't want to have contact with any services like Open Arms that are affiliated with the ADF. So that's one of the insights that we did glean when we sort of drilled down. But in terms of the sort of topics, there's no obvious difference to the sorts of topics that other people, like people from other priority groups or just from the broader population, are discussing with our crisis supporters.
And Ms Brooks, can you please tell me how many times Defence or DVA bothers to speak to Lifeline about this? How many times a year? And if that be the case, what lists of Defence and Department of Veterans Affairs given you if these people need to contact others outside which are inside our net? Do you have those lists? Have they bothered to do any of this with you? I just want to see whether they're real here.
Yeah, so look, it's a great question, and we've had the privilege of being fairly heavily involved in sort of providing input into the mental health and wellbeing plan and then the implementation plan that DVA did. So that was a great opportunity to start to form those connections. And then from there, we have actually, particularly with Open Arms, we have actually been fairly heavily engaged, including most recently, so for the new Wellbeing Agency, the voice sort of recording before you sort of, go into the telephone support. We've spoken to DVA about actually having us there as an additional sort of reference point so we're, I think, going to be included in the IVR. And we've also engaged, and it's been mutual, but we've been sort of providing support from the crisis support sort of perspective to DVA for this new Wellbeing Agency. So there has been, and this is sort of been an evolving story, but we're at a pretty high cadence of engagement with DVA at the moment, and it's been a real for us. That's a terrific development, and we really hope to continue working quite closely and looking at cross-referral, possibilities, so that if more tailored support would be, better for someone who's reached out to Lifeline, we can look at how we might be able to make those referrals more effectively, and vice versa. So that's it's an evolving story, but definitely lots of information flow going both ways.
Okay, so just to make this clear, DVA and Defence, you cannot contact them 24 hours a day, can you? After hours.
So I'm not sure what's happening with the new Wellbeing Agency. I'm sorry, I can't answer that with any sort of definitive sort of answer. But
I don't think that was opening 24 hours. I don't think that's the thing of the Wellbeing Agency. I don't know what their plan is yet. We'll see who's in charge, I guess, and where that goes. But right now at this moment, and what I know has been going on for years, is that after 5 o'clock, after normal business hours, veterans, serving or not serving, cannot get the help that they need because we do not have a 24-hour line directing us to where we need to go. That is why they're using you and other services, which is disgusting in itself. So, all right, I have no further questions. So thank you so much, and thank you for all the work that you guys do. I know that you participate. Beyond Blue does the same thing. It lifts up. There are many organisations out there that are not military aligned, which are picking up the pieces which shouldn't be, and that's really sad because you have enough public people on your own agenda. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Senator Lambie. Now, Senator Cox, you've got some questions, I understand.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks, for appearing today. I hope you can hear me at your end. Yes, great. I know that Lifeline Australia played a pretty active role during the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide. I know that you just touched on that slightly with Senator Lambie's question, but to what extent do you believe that this bill sort of gives effect to the recommendations directed at reducing harms associated with particularly military disciplinary processes?
Thank you. So just with the caveat that, sort of legislation is not my area of expertise. So our submission was intended to sort of speak to it at a higher level. The things that I would reflect, particularly around sort of recommendation 63, with the objective of reducing stigma and structural barriers and cultural barriers to help seeking. I think, the attempt to sort of implement that in the legislation change is something that we know it's incredibly important in terms of suicide prevention efforts. So, there's been a lot of work that's gone into stigma reduction and to encouraging help seeking, but it's still, we still have an awfully long ways to go. At the sort of broad population level in that respect, and particularly for male-based occupation groups. It's really challenging. Help-seeking rates amongst males, who themselves, as you all know, 75% of deaths by suicide are males. Unfortunately, encouraging that help-seeking behaviour is challenging. And I think we're making headway, but there's still a lot of work to do. So the implementation of that, sort of intended implementation of that, via this change, is something that we really embrace based on what we know from suicide prevention more broadly. And then also in some of the other changes related to recommendations 18, 20, 23 to 34, we know that the experience victim survivors, particularly of domestic family sexualised violence, that is a risk factor in and of itself for suicide. As you'll know, there's a recent inquiry into the relationship between DFSV and suicide. Those relationships are now pretty well established in the literature for victim survivors and for perpetrators of DFSV. There's a heightened suicide risk, and so the implementation of better protections around for victim survivors around the legislative around disciplinary processes. Also something that we warmly embrace from a suicide prevention perspective. So, sort of noting that I'm speaking to it at a very sort of general level, the intent of these changes around better protecting victim survivors, and increasing, help-seeking behaviours via stigma reduction, is all of that is positive news from the suicide prevention perspective, Senator.
That's great. And I think you sort of touched on that for me a little bit around some of those really practical benefits that apply to, defence-affiliated help seekers in relation to this. Do you see that from those practical benefits, that this bill actually tries to strengthen that in a more fairer, more efficient way from I particularly want to lean into your expertise in the trauma field, and what does that actually mean at a really practical level for people who want to ensure that, the government are wanting to ensure, obviously, we are trying to make this a much more accessible, fairer, and beneficial process, but also more efficient, I think, at the heart of that.
Yeah. So, look, I think that in terms of victim survivors in particular, I mean, I'm sure you've heard it a lot. Talk about sort of a trauma-informed approach, and one of the sort of elements of that is, trying to minimise the number of times people have to tell and retell their story. In sort of, I guess, improving processes around how people report and then are supported during the sort of disciplinary processes, that should have material positive impact. That taking a trauma-informed approach, which should be part of improving those processes, is something that from the perspective, like from the literature, we know should have a positive impact. So that's one very practical, I guess, material sort of benefit. I think also, look, like going through disciplinary processes and the associated sort of concerns about, job stability and, as I mentioned earlier, job loss, fear of job loss, that's a really significant stressor for people in terms of mental health wellbeing and indeed suicide risk. So having more transparent processes, so, from the victim survivor perspective, also from the perpetrator perspective, having transparent processes that sort of better align with what's happening sort of outside of the defence context. Also, I think as a suicide prevention wellbeing sort of measure, very very positive thing as well. So look, I think there's a few practical examples. I hope that's sort of touching on answering your question, Senator, but I'm happy to sort of go further if I'm not quite getting it right.
No, I think that's great, and obviously, like making sure that the system is supportive to people who are on either side of that is what trauma-informed and victim-centred approaches, but looking after everyone's wellbeing in that process around transparency is really important. So thank you for mentioning that. That's all from me. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks a lot. I don't think any other senators have questions. No? All right. Thank you, Doctor, for your time today. And if there were any questions that were taken on notice, could you please provide a response by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, the 21st of July. We're now going to move on. Thank you very much. We're now going to move on to our next witness. I'd like to now welcome Mr. David Gibson, who's the chair of the GLBTI Rights in Ageing Incorporation. And I understand, Mr. Gibson, that you have been provided information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees. And thank you for your appearance this morning. Now, for the Hansard record, could I ask that you state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My full name is David Gibson. I'm the chair of GRAY, which is GLBTI Rights in Ageing, Inc. GRAY is Australia's only peer-led, community-controlled organisation dedicated to the rights and wellbeing of older LGBTI people. And when GRAY refers to older, we loosely look at 50 plus. No science behind it, just a nice number that captures a great group of people. At the outset, I want to be clear that GRAY strongly supports this bill. It represents an important acknowledgement of what happened to many LGBTI veterans in the Australian Defence Force, that it was wrong. By addressing past discrimination, it also helps lessen the ongoing detriment and stigma that many continue to carry, and it's long overdue for these historical injustices to be addressed. Our concern is not with what the bill includes, but who will be left behind. The inquiry is not about homosexuality, it's about service. Every person impacted by this bill volunteered to serve Australia. The question before the committee is whether redress should depend on the paperwork Defence used to end that service or the injustice that was done. There is broad support for addressing these historical injustices. That support extends beyond community organisations to defence organisations, including RSL Australia, whom GRAY has consulted with. The Department of Defence itself acknowledges the importance of addressing these historical injustices and restoring confidence in defence institutions. The personal submissions before this committee tell a consistent story. LGBTI veterans explained that they were never charged with an offence. Instead, they were investigated, pressured to resign, or administratively discharged because of who they loved. Although the administrative pathway differed, the outcome was the same. Careers ended, reputations were damaged, and decades of unnecessary hurt followed. Under this current bill, those veterans are excluded simply because Defence chose a different process. GRAY's concern is that the legislation will unintentionally create two categories of LGBTI veterans: those whose records include a conviction and become eligible for redress, and those who experienced the same discrimination, the same consequences, but were removed through an administrative process. Our submission proposes practical amendments to ensure eligibility reflects the injustice experienced rather than the administrative pathway that Defence happened to use. We believe that approach is consistent with the intent of the bill, the evidence before the committee, and the principles of fairness underpinning the Royal Commission's recommendations. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to assisting the committee with the questions.
Thanks a lot for that, Mr. Gibson. Thank you for your submission. I'll just kick off with a couple of questions before I hand over to colleagues. You say that the bill recognises that past laws and policies were discriminatory and inconsistent with, I guess, today's contemporary values, and that's fair enough. From your engagement with veterans, what impact could that recognition now have on with respect to trust in government and defence institutions?
If we get it right, it will be huge. If we don't, it will reinforce what these veterans are experiencing, and that is a system that didn't want them and a reluctance to engage with a system that is there for them now and they're not picking up. And a great example of that, Chair, is in preparing, GRAY spoke with a lot of veterans, and I remember a conversation I had with a 78-year-old former RAF member who to this day hasn't applied for his service medal because of the shame that he experiences thinking about the way in which he was let go from the Air Force. So there is, I think, a great opportunity for government and for Defence to get this right and recognise the injustice that was done. And that way, I think you'll see a great deal more trust, not only from older LGBTI veterans, but I think from younger as well. You know, we also engaged, I provided in the submission, a young transgender, well, I say young, in their 40s, a young transgender person who shared their experience when they were going through Kapuka. And even though homosexuality had been removed as a barrier of service, there was still the homophobic language being used in that training environment. That first experience you have in the military is through that lens. And I think there's a lot that can be done within Defence's culture as well for current serving members to see this injustice be rectified.
The evidence that you've provided for your submission also suggests that many affected veterans have disengaged from defence and veteran support systems. So what steps should the government now be looking at to ensure that those veterans who are eligible are also aware that they can access these services? And I guess the recognition that the measures that are created by this bill that might help them either to go, okay, I have now have eligibility for this service, or jumping over those barriers that may have been there that are now no longer there, that gives them confidence that the system finally recognises them for who they are.
Look, this is a great question, and I think a great opportunity for government. I'm going to use my own personal circumstances. I left. I wasn't aware that I was eligible for a white card, a DVA white card, which I'm sure you're all aware you get after 1 day service. Was not aware of that because I had disengaged completely. The shame, the internalised homophobia. I don't turn up. I haven't turned up to class reunions from my graduating class at Duntroon, despite the fact that none of my peers have at any point shown any homophobic tendencies. It's just that, that disconnection that occurs. I think what government can do and what Defence should do with the passing of this bill, amended so that it includes everybody, is really make a proactive effort to engage with the LGBTI community. And that means not going through the usual channels. They're going to need to reach out to organisations like Grey and others. They should engage in paid advertising that reflects and has images of LGBTI veterans in the LGBTI media landscape. So there are various outlets across Australia. In preparing for this bill, Grey engaged with Joy FM in Melbourne, Star, and out in Perth, the 2 online news agencies. I think Defence really needs to make and have a concerted communications plan that reaches out to these people, and then measure the metrics. Ask people, about their sexuality. I mean, we're bringing it into the census for the first time this year, which will be a huge benefit for government, and we'll be able to see how many LGBTI people indicate their sexuality and indicate their veteran service. I was able to do that in the last census, but I wasn't able to indicate my sexuality. So I think, they need to start asking the questions about people. They need to start getting the information, not in the DVA newsletter, which I'm sure is good, but I don't get and I don't read. Let's get it in places where LGBTI people are and want to get this information.
Can I just take you to your second recommendation about the annotation of defence records? I just was hoping that you might be able to unpack for us, I guess, why you've put that recommendation, but also around the benefits that would mean to so many veterans, particularly, I guess, how some history, I guess, would have been recorded as you say, either a resignation or some other means that they've been discharged. But in actual fact, there was something else behind that.
Indeed, and may I apologise if you can hear my dogs barking in the background.
I'm trying to work out if it's your computer or a dog going nuts.
No, I have an Irish Wolfhound rescue puppy who has just been desexed, the poor thing, but he's letting the world know. I assure you. So I do apologise. Look, to recommendation 2, and this was, I've got to say, this was a shock. Again, I'm going to reflect personally because I can speak to this, but I think the experience would be the same for many. When I sourced or requested my defence records, I was surprised the number of pieces of records in various forms that related to me being a homosexual. It is numerous. It rates from phone records between the brigade major and the military police. It's between a letter between the Commander 3 Brigade and the military secretary. It's the psych report that I've got to admit, I thought that they were concerned about my well-being and that's why I saw a psychologist. No, the psych report was simply to add another piece of evidence to the administrative discharge. I would like to let that psychiatrist know, though, that all these years, some 37 years afterward, I'm still not confused about my sexuality. I know who I am and I haven't changed. This isn't a phase I'm going through that they reported at the time. The fact that we have so many of these documents, and anyone who's been in the military knows that, we've got everything on our files. And it's not that these documents need to be removed, but unlike just doing a simple expungement, which is looking at one record, your conduct record, we have multiple pieces of documents, the signal that sends you to discharge, all of those things, and there needs to be an annotation or something that tells, because if you read those documents by themselves, the story they tell you is that I had done something wrong. I was not a fit and proper person. Somehow my conduct in the military, my service was below par. And I would be so bold to argue, well, there was nothing wrong with my service. What was wrong was that Defence couldn't accept who I loved. That was what was wrong. And so I think the records that we have on our records need to be annotated. And I appreciate that there's a large workload with that. And if they can't, then I think there needs to be an overall statement at the front of our Defence records that simply indicate that there are records contained in this file that reflect a policy position that is no longer current and does not impact on the service, the conduct of the service. Consistently, when I spoke to people, they were surprised by what they read in their records, those who had accessed it, the way in which the military police had described individuals in their reports, the way in which commanding officers had described individuals that were being considered for promotion the week before the military police stepped in. That to me speaks volumes. You have a soldier, a sailor, an airman who you're saying, you know what, we want you to step up and take the next role. And then the next time that there's a record in their on their Defence records, we're saying we want you out. It's not consistent, and we need to do something about that so veterans can have that story told correctly and accurately.
All right, thanks, Mr. Gibson. Now, Deputy Chair or Senator Lambie, Deputy Chair?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Senator Lambie.
Thank you. Thank you for appearing this morning, Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Senator.
And I'm sorry for what you went through. You and there's thousands of you out there. I'm aware of that. You propose, and I think you just went into a little bit, but you do propose creating a new mechanism for recognising historical discriminatory administrative actions. My problem is, because I go back so far, as you would know, and I've heard you explain this, but how should decision makers determine whether an administrative discharge or security clearance decision, things like that, was actually motivated by discrimination rather than some legitimate? You are right, they're going to have to go right through those files. I'm just, I don't know whether it's just an apology without going through that, but that still leaves your file. But by geez, I could imagine there's going to be thousands out there.
Look, I think the large problem that we have, Senator, is we don't know. We absolutely don't know exactly how many people were pushed through an administrative discharge process for exact reasons that you sort of highlighted. I think there are two elements to this. When you look at, when you look at this bill as it's currently drafted, it proposes to expunge homosexuality convictions back to the implementation of the Defence Act. Okay, so we are giving, Defence is saying, you know what, we did something wrong and we're willing to go back to the point in time in which the Australian Defence Force became its own entity. And that's what this bill provides for. So if someone wants to go, you know what, my great-grandfather was discharged on the beaches of Gallipoli for being a homosexual, that would be picked up under this bill because if there was a conviction in place. Why has Defence done that? Because it's the right thing to do. Now, would that take a lot of work? Yeah, absolutely it would. But they recognise it's the right thing to do. On an administrative, and the other point I want to make is that the way the bill is worded, it is on application. They are not doing it for everybody automatically. People need to apply. And for many of these people, they will have already passed. I spoke to a man last night whose husband or partner passed away last year, former Army, infantryman who was discharged from Townsville for being gay. Surprisingly, and I deviate here, but I think the story's worth telling, he loved the Army that much, got kicked out, went through incredible depression, came back to Perth, and then thought, you know what, I'm going to sign up in the reserves. Now, we didn't have computers back then, I'm guessing, or not to the extent that we did. Paperwork wasn't checked. He was accepted in the reserves and had a second career as a reservist, then got identified to become a commissioned officer. It was that point his file went to Canberra. He got called in and got kicked out of the Army a second time for being a homosexual, even though they were considering commissioning him as an officer because what was on his regular Army file. So that is there. I think why it needs to happen, and yes, acknowledging it's a lot of work, but there is a lot of trauma that has been resulted as of this. And I think it's the least that Defence can do is to commit some resources on application. It will only be as people apply, and that way then they can pull that file, they can go through, and where it is necessary, and let's use the security clearance one because I think that's a great example. Let's use that where they look at it and say, what issue do we have apart from this individual being a homosexual that their security clearance was downgraded? And if there is nothing else, if there was no other concerns, then it's a cut and dry matter. If there are other concerns, then give the individual the opportunity to respond to those concerns. It may be that there are other valid reasons that, with regards to the security clearance, it was downgraded, and it happened to be that as a result of that downgrading, they discovered the person was a homosexual. Their discharge could still be noted, but the security clearance may not be adjusted in that place. We're not asking for carte blanche, remove everything.
I'm not worried about that, but it's also the people that have been on charges that were bricked, right, where they haven't been administered discharge. How many of them are out there? And I imagine there's thousands of them.
Exactly.
It's very big. It's actually quite a lot of work, and then you've got to determine from the paperwork that you've got, and that's if Defence has kept all the paperwork, because some things go through the shredder. Yeah. You know how it works, especially back then when you didn't have 24-hour news and all that sort of stuff. A lot of that stuff going on. It would be a big mission. I'm just wondering if it might be worth you going away to think about if there's so it doesn't put them through any more anguish. It doesn't take years and years and years for them to go through, because I think there's a lot out there. I just want, is there a blanket? Is there I know it's great to go out there and apologise, but it still leaves that on their documents, and I know that they don't want that, and that's fair enough. There's nothing worse than having all that military document that you're proud of that's got that stuff in it that should never have been in it, should never have happened. It's just a reminder.
Acknowledging what you're saying, Senator, and I draw your attention to recommendation 4, because I think this can be done, a certificate of honourable service. And that can be created, again, on application, but I think that can be created for individuals. And that is an immediate, quick step that we can go through. We have waited, as LGBTI veterans, we have waited 34 years for governments of any persuasion to recognise us. It has been a long time coming, and we don't want to wait any longer. And if it takes additional resources for Defence to do this, they found the resources to conduct the witch hunts back in the 70s and 80s. They found the resources to bring in the psychs, to assess us against a DSM that didn't list homosexuality as a mental disorder, and yet was still there. So they found the resources when they wanted to get rid of us. They can find the resources now to address the injustice that has occurred. That would be my statement.
Yeah. Okay, then. I don't think I have any more questions. Thank you so much. I know it's been a long and painful road for you, Mr. Gibson, and thousands of others out there. I have Defence up this morning, so I guess I'll be asking them that question, how they intend. My question would be to them, and I'm sure they're listening, is how they intend to combat this.
Yep.
Because what they're doing is not even close. So is there going to be an apology out there? What are they going to do? Are they going to move? But something needs to be done. And you're right, they've got resources out there and they've got plenty of money. Yeah, when they want to do something. So I think, these people, The only way they're going to get some rest, these people that have been done, is to make sure that they're giving an apology and to fix some of that data up if they want it fixed up.
And Senator, can I just touch on the apology quickly? Everyone I've spoken to has said, we don't want an apology from Defence. We want an apology from the nation. And I understand the Governor-General is the leader of the nation, but for all intents and purposes, the Prime Minister is a person we average Australians see.
I agree with you, yeah. It wouldn't come down to Defence. I mean, they need to get, but Defence should be pushing the issue and saying, you need to give them an apology, and then the CDF should be standing there next to him. I don't give a rat's, but something needs to be done. Just cowards. It's coward behaviour, and once again, bad leadership. Once again. Thank you so much, Mr. Gibson.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gibson, thank you very much for your time this morning. I just also want to place on the record our thanks for your experience, you sharing your personal experience, but also that of many service men who've put forward, obviously not their names, but obviously prepared to share their experience in your submission and acknowledge your service, as well as everyone else that has appeared before us this morning. On that note, we are going to break for morning tea and then come back with the department and DVSC, and we will now suspend. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. I would now like to welcome representatives from the Department of Defence and the Defence and Veterans Service Commission. The Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of an officer to a superior officer or to a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer having regard to the ground which it is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. Commonwealth officers appearing today are also reminded of the standing order specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised, and a copy of that order will now be incorporated into the Hansard and is available from the Secretariat. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses given evidence to Senate committees has also been provided to you. Now, could I ask, going from my left to my right, for those at the table, if you could, for the Hansard record, state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today, please.
Hello, I'm Air Commodore Christopher Taylor, General Counsel for the Military Law in the Department of Defence.
Good afternoon, Chair. Air Vice Marshal Lara Gunn, Head of Joint Support Services in the Department of Defence.
And I'm Penny Mackay, I'm the Defence and Veterans Service Commissioner.
Catherine Seaberg, Assistant Commissioner Inquiries and Legal at the DVSC.
And Kim Williams, General Counsel, DVSC.
Okay, now I'm going to ask, does anyone at the table, and apologies because I can only just see a couple from the angle I can see online, but does anyone have an opening statement they'd like to make this morning?
Yes, please, Chair.
And I do as well.
Okay, sorry, who was that?
Air Vice Marshal Gunn.
Yep.
And Penny Mackay.
Off you go. All right, off you go.
Okay. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear today on behalf of Defence. The Royal Commission into Defence and Veterans Suicide final report identified that a well-functioning military justice system is essential for Defence to maintain good order and effective operational control, and is equally crucial to the mental health and well-being of ADF members. The Royal Commission found that ADF members who have been involved in the military justice system are at an increased risk of suicide. This bill seeks to implement the specific Royal Commission recommendations related to military justice that require legislative reform in the Defence Force Discipline Act, and it seeks to reform the military discipline system to achieve the Royal Commission's broader intent of minimising harm to victims and offenders engaged within the military discipline system. The bill supports the implementation of 5 key recommendations arising from the Royal Commission and recommendations from other reviews of the military justice system. These reforms are intended to reduce harm associated with military justice processes while maintaining the effectiveness of service discipline. It seeks to better balance fairness, transparency, operational effectiveness and member wellbeing. And Defence considers the bill an important and necessary step in broader military justice reform. We do recognise, however, that legislation alone is not sufficient. Defence is therefore continuing policy, training and cultural reform activities to support implementation. And we welcome the further input from stakeholders during this committee process. Thank you.
Thank you. And sorry, I can't see the camera angle, but next person who had an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd also like to thank the committee for the opportunity to appear before you today regarding this bill. I commenced as the Acting Commissioner of the DVSC in September last year and was appointed as the inaugural Commissioner from the 1st of June this year. And I'm honoured to be able to lead the work of the new Commission for the first 5 years. the Defence and Veterans Service Commission commenced on the 29th of September 2025 as a new independent statutory oversight body. We've been tasked with providing evidence-based advice to government to improve suicide prevention and wellbeing outcomes for both serving and ex-serving members of the Australian Defence Force. It was a key recommendation of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veterans Suicide that we be established to do that and to ensure accountability and transparency in the implementation of their recommendations. Among other things, this bill is aimed at implementing recommendations 18, 20, 23, 34 and 63 of the Royal Commission's final report. A key role of my agency is to publicly report on the implementation of the government's response to the Royal Commission's recommendations. Under our legislation, we're required to provide 2 progress reports to government. The first report is due on the 5th of February 2027 and the second by the 2nd of December 2030. But in assessing whether a recommendation is implemented, I'm really interested in answering three key questions in relation to each recommendation. Firstly, has a recommendation been implemented in a timely way? Secondly, did the implementation meet the intent of the Royal Commission? And that is, was it implemented meaningfully? And thirdly, was the implementation effective? Or in other words, did it achieve the improvement it was aimed at making? Or more specifically, did it improve wellbeing outcomes for serving and ex-serving members of the ADF? The bill before you proposes amendments to the ADF's military justice system. The Royal Commission found that involvement in the military justice system, whether as a victim or an accused, was a risk factor for suicide. And the DVSC will evaluate the implementation of the Royal Commission recommendations, to which some of the amendments relate, as part of our 2 progress reports. And later this year, the DVSC will also formally commence an independent inquiry into military sexual violence in the ADF. This inquiry has been requested by the Minister and will deliver on recommendation 25 of the Royal Commission. The inquiry will report by the end of 2027 and will consider any reforms needed to prevent, manage and respond to military sexual violence. As part of this inquiry, we'll also assess the progress taken to implement Royal Commission recommendations 14 to 24. So this will include consideration of some of the measures in this bill relating to recommendations 18, 20 and 23. In our submission, I highlighted where relevant specific matters I'll look at when reviewing the effectiveness of the government's implementation of these recommendations. But in short, whilst legislative amendments shows serious commitment to change and progress towards recommendation implementation, meaningful implementation requires more. It requires true reflection of the intent of the Royal Commission's recommendation. It requires policy, procedures, training, review and evaluation, leadership and cultural change to ensure real change is embedded and ultimately improves the system for those who are engaging with it. I note the bill also contains a very small amendment to the newly commenced Defence and Veterans Service Commissioner Act to expand the protection against self-incrimination to proceedings before summary authorities. I support this amendment. The DVSC also has independent powers of inquiry. We can commence an independent inquiry into matters relating to our purpose at any time. And whilst we're currently focused on the inquiries I've already outlined to you, we'll continue to monitor other issues aligned to our purpose, including some of the matters addressed in this bill. So my comments on the bill before the committee today are made through the lens of my role and functions and the work of the DVSC. So we've tended to focus on those amendments aligned to the Royal Commission recommendations in the first instance. However, where I can assist the committee, I welcome the opportunity to do so.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Now, I'll come to Senator Cox and then I'll see if the Deputy Chair has any questions and then Senator Lambie. Senator Cox.
Chair. I understand that Minister Keogh's announced that the government's desire to have 2/3 of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide recommendations be fully implemented by the end of this year. This is a question for the Department of Defence. How many of those recommendations will this bill implement?
Thank you so very much, Senator. So this bill will either contribute to or fully implement 5 of those recommendations.
That's great, thank you. I note that the military justice system can be a foreign concept to many people in the Australian community. Can you explain why streamlining the system would be beneficial to members of the ADF?
Absolutely, thank you so very much. So Defence is committed to simplifying the military justice system, which is about reducing delay, also expanding options to elections, and ensuring that minor disciplinary matters are addressed both swiftly, fairly, and in a way that supports good order and discipline. The current discipline system has 3 tiers: a discipline infringement scheme, summary authorities, and service tribunals. And this bill replaces that existing mid-tier with a new system of summary contraventions that will allow for more streamlined and efficient military discipline outcomes, providing an intermediate option for dealing with what are contested minor misconduct. And that is intended to avoid unnecessary escalation of minor disciplinary matters. So the intent of the summary convention scheme in particular is to create a fit-for-purpose mechanism for dealing with matters that are too serious for the disciplinary infringement scheme, but not sufficiently serious to warrant charge as a service offence. And this aligns this Act with contemporary expectations that minor discipline issues should be resolved promptly and proportionately, supporting command authority, morale, efficiency and operational readiness, and thereby reducing the time that members are exposed to the military discipline system. The system will retain its existing safeguards, review mechanisms and oversight arrangements.
Thank you very much for that. Just referencing the bill's changes to the summary disciplinary system, why do you think it's so important to have these changes? Why are they necessary now?
Thank you for that question. So we have found at this mid-tier level that the increased complexity was causing confusion and was impacting confidence and competence of those using the system and extending the time of the individuals exposed to the system for what were lower level misconduct matters. So we consider this important as a harm prevention measure and also a timeliness and efficiency measure to ensure that misconduct is dealt with efficiently at the most appropriate level, but where members who are exposed to it retain the right to elect to be heard at a higher level by those who are more legally qualified.
That's great, thank you. Just in relation to how this bill might support ADF members, but specifically mental health treatment, are you able to expand a little bit on that for us?
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. So we, of course, acknowledge that the findings of the Royal Commission that military justice processes can significantly affect the mental health and wellbeing of our members. So this bill broadly seeks to minimise the time that members are exposed to military justice proceedings for those minor matters and reducing that associated risk of harm. The bill is also removing outdated and stigmatising language, including the offence of malingering. But in particular, Schedule 3 of the bill is one of its most transformative parts in that it overhauls how the DFDA deals with accused members suffering from mental impairment, both introducing new powers permitting a tribunal to adjourn proceedings where continuing would be detrimental to the accused or contrary to the interests of defence, but it also allows in limited circumstances the dismissal of a charge where the accused suffers from a mental impairment and prosecution would not meaningfully serve the maintenance of discipline. These reforms collectively replace the rigid and outdated unsoundness of mind framework and acknowledge the urgent concerns identified by the Royal Commission regarding trauma and mental health in the defence context. Part 2 of that schedule then establishes the Defence Mental Health Tribunal framework, which aims to modernise our practice in line with civilian mental health jurisprudence and provides a clinically informed alternative to the existing outdated custodial provisions currently in the DFDA.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad that you mentioned the new Mental Health Tribunal. Importantly, why it's required to better support ADF members. I'm hoping that you can explain to us as a committee why it's so important that we do support our ADF members, particularly when members are subject to that military justice system.
Absolutely, Senator. So we acknowledge that anybody exposed to any justice system is likely to have harm caused by that exposure. Our existing arrangements are recognised as being outdated and inconsistent with modern civilian approaches. So we have looked externally, looked at other jurisdictions and are looking to incorporate those into our system while ensuring that the existing safeguards and supports available to our personnel remain and are not compromised by the introduction of this. The tribunal in particular provides a diversionary pathway that was not previously available within the military justice system to support that diversion from disciplinary proceedings where it is appropriate. So where a member is unfit to plead or is acquitted because of mental health impairment, the Mental Health Tribunal may order treatment, care or detention as appropriate. And this is, of course, important for our members that they have those options and pathways and that the systems within the defence continue to reflect those within the community where possible.
That's great, thank you. Are you able to walk the committee through the implementation of the Mental Health Tribunal?
So at this point in time, we haven't developed all of the detail because the first step is the legislative authority to make these rules. We have been undertaking planning since this arose from a Director of Military Prosecution recommendation some years ago, and that implementation planning is necessary to ensure appropriate legal, clinical and administrative support arrangements are established before commencement. We have been engaged with the AGS, an eminent professor of the University of Queensland in medical law and a former chief psychiatrist of Queensland in the development of this bill and as part of our initial planning. It is, however, necessary and appropriate for the commencement of the tribunal framework to be deferred until we have the necessary supporting arrangements required for its operation established. So it will not commence immediately because we require time and engagement with states and territories to negotiate access to appropriate treatment facilities and services and to then develop the regulations and rules necessary to support the operation of the framework.
That's great, thank you very much. That's all my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks a lot, Senator. Now, I'll come to the Deputy Chair, Senator Collins, and then Senator Levy. Senator Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for appearing today and thank you for your service. A provision has been introduced in this bill to suspend a service member if they are, and this is from Schedule 1, Part 1, and I'm quoting here, they're under investigation by an authority of a place outside of Australia because the member may have committed an overseas offence against a law of that place. So does this mean that a soldier could be suspended if a foreign country is investigating them?
Thank you for that question, Senator. Yes, it does mean that that would be possible, but it would not be an automatic activity, and it would be something that would be considered by the authorised person who can make that decision, and it's done also in subject to procedural fairness, and the person who's potentially subject to that decision being given a say in terms of that decision.
When you say authorised person, who would that be in this case?
That would be a person authorised by, as I understand it, the Chief of the Defence Force.
A uniformed person, or would it be somebody potentially outside?
Uniformed, a member of the Australian Defence Force, Senator.
Okay. And why has this particular clause been added?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So thank you, Senator. So the Defence Force Discipline Act, and within Defence we already have the powers and the legal authority to suspend members who are under military policing investigation or members in the civil setting who have been charged or convicted of an offence. What the Royal Commission recommendation identified was that we did not have the powers to suspend somebody who was under a civilian police investigation, and that was a gap in terms of the protective measures that Command in particular could consider taking when it had come to their attention that one of their members was under investigation by civil police for a serious offence.
It's just that the international element is a new element, and I just find that particular part of it very intriguing. Can you give me some examples of when or of how this could be used?
Thank you for the question, Senator. There could be a number of circumstances in which if an ADF member is on exercise in a foreign country or on operations in a foreign country, but say, for example, on exercise, they commit they are being investigated for alleged breaches of the laws of that country. This would enable the similar processes which apply in Australia to apply to the continuation of them performing duties in that foreign country while they're under investigation. Again, it's a discretionary power exercised by an authorised officer, and it's not. And a member would also not lose their pay for the duration of that period as well. So there's no. They would be stood down from duty, but it could arise in a number of circumstances in foreign countries where there's a crime is alleged.
Under this new bill, could that authorised person be directed by the Minister of the Government?
No, not that I'm aware. I'm not aware that could occur. No.
Who's asked for the international element? Whose recommendation was that?
I'm not aware of that, Senator.
Yeah, we may have to take that on notice, Senator. I'm not aware of whether that arose from a particular recommendation or as part of the development of this bill and the components in it through the various wargaming activities that we undertook with Command and senior enlisted members, and looking through the various scenarios and, in some cases, unintended consequences that was developed as part of this, noting that, of course, our members can be investigated anywhere in the world, and therefore having this option available to Command as a discretion to consider suspension action, noting they have other options available to them as well, which could include returning the person to Australia. It is discretionary. It was identified that this would be a useful option to have available for those limited circumstances where our members may be overseas and may be under investigation.
Okay. Because my understanding is that it wasn't part of the recommendations of the Royal Commission, so I'm just trying to understand.
No, this was not a specific recommendation of the Royal Commission, Senator. We took the opportunity to incorporate other reforms as part of this bill.
Okay. So the bill will give the Defence Minister the ability to order the Director of Military Prosecutions to instigate legal proceedings against currently serving members. So who asked for this particular new power?
As I understand it, the power itself, I'm not exactly sure where it was instigated from, but I understand the rationale for it is that it essentially places the Minister for Defence vis-a-vis the Director of Military Prosecutions in the same position as the Attorney-General is in respect of the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions in terms of being able to issue directions for the exercise of prosecutorial discretion. So my understanding is that they're quite aligned and that there's no material difference between the two.
So in effect, it will mean that the Defence Minister can instigate war crimes prosecutions against currently serving members?
I don't think that's the case, Senator. So
why not? What's the difference here?
I don't. So it can. So I think it enables the prosecutional guidelines, but not in respect of direction on individual matters. But I might need to just double check that.
So what does that mean? The prosecutional guidelines. What is that? What's the powers? I mean, my understanding is it gives the ability to order the DMP to instigate prosecution. So, in my mind, and you just aligned it with the Attorney General's current powers. So, you need the Attorney General to sign off on war crimes investigations or charges. So, is this now giving the Defence Minister the ability to do the same?
I think I'll need to take that one on notice. I don't have the exact details of that just at the front of my mind.
Okay. Air Vice Marshal, do you have a...
I don't have the details on that, Senator, but my understanding is that this is not related to and not intending to enable a minister to bring war crimes investigations and to direct that those occur by the DMP. It's about ensuring alignment with contemporary standards aligned to processes with the DPP.
Okay, but so the possibility is there, and at a very basic level, the Defence Minister can now order the DPM to instigate legal proceedings against a currently serving member, whatever the...
Senator, I think I'll have to take that one on notice. I don't think that is the case, but I'll need to go back and provide confirmation that is so.
Thank you. So, the Defence Force Discipline Act defines an investigating officer as a police member or an officer, warrant officer or a non-commissioned officer. This change appears to open the door to a civilian being appointed as an investigating officer. So, can you just clarify for me, please, whether this would allow civilian members of Defence, like employees of Security and Estate Division, to become investigating officers for the purpose of this Act?
Thanks for the question, Senator. So we have a number of investigative authorities across Defence already that are not just military police, but this bill focuses on the Defence Force Discipline Act and the investigations under it. So the changes to allow for the appointment of investigating officers who are not uniformed ADF members is looking at bringing into, for example, the Joint Military Police, individuals who have very specific or particular expertise in particular classes of offending, like sexual violence in that regard.
We're already able to bring in expert advice or support for investigations. What is the gap here that we're trying to fill? My understanding is that you're, under this Act, you will be, or this bill, you would be allowed to appoint civilian people to be the investigative officer rather than just contributing to the investigation with their expert advice.
Absolutely. So it would enable the Chief of Defence Force or delegate to appoint a civilian with specialist expertise to undertake a particular investigation. So
then this allows, if it's civilian, it allows for the outsourcing to contractors for investigations.
It's not intended to allow outsourcing. It's intended that the individuals would still reside within Defence, whether as a public servant in that regard, but within the Department of Defence.
Okay, so somebody, for example, from Security and Estate Division could then be appointed the investigative officer?
If they had the necessary expertise and qualifications for the particular investigation we were looking to appoint them for.
Okay. Did you have anything
just
to add?
One addition I'll just say is it would provide them, that person, to exercise powers, but more importantly, it would actually provide them with, it would also limit their, give them certain responsibilities under the Act when performing those roles as well at the moment, which is, I think, a key benefit of the of having them formally appointed as such.
Okay. just to be clear, so under the bill, would be able to appoint civilian people within the Defence Force, within the Security and State Division, potentially, to be able to investigate if they have the necessary qualifications, expertise. We are currently outsourcing our security to Wilson and MSS Security, and they have investigative expertise. There's something that they advertise as part of their offering. So under this bill, MSS Security, Wilson Security would be able to investigate defence members on base.
Yeah, we're not looking to employ people from security and a state group. Those individuals and the types of investigations that they undertake are quite different from the types of investigations that military police undertake under the Defence Force Discipline Act, being service offences, some sexual violence offences that are not taken up in the criminal justice system. So it's not that we're looking to hire individuals from security, a state group and other security providers. We're talking about investigating people-based offences under the Defence Force Discipline Act in particular. What that's more likely to look like is where we have relationships with former state and territory police officers, for example, many of whom are reservists in our organisation already, and we're able to share expertise and knowledge with them. But we might look to employ, for example, a former state or territory police officer into a public servant role where they have previously worked in a specialist sexual violence crime unit, for example.
Sure. And there is, I understand there is a huge amount of policing expertise in the Defence Force currently, but as we understand the bill, given that it can, an authorising officer can allocate an investigation to a civilian within the Defence Force, the possibility is there for that to then be appointed to a security firm if they have the expertise, if they have the qualifications to be able to do it. The bill as it stands allows for that. Even if it's not the intention, the bill as it stands allows for that. Is that correct?
It would allow for it, but I mean, discretion in terms of appointment by the Chief of the Defence Force is probably the most important safeguard to ensure that that appropriate people with the right skills and understanding of both the context and the law applying under the DFDA would be appointed.
So it would always come down to the Chief of the Defence Force, his or her decision.
That's how I understand it. So that's the filter.
But is that how the bill sets it up?
It is under delegation. It does require appointment by Chief of Defence Force or delegate.
Okay, but the delegation could come from the Defence Minister.
No, it comes from CDF or somebody he chooses to delegate within the organisation, within Defence.
All right, because I'm trying to understand here. We've got the Defence Minister that can now order legal proceedings under this bill, and we've also got investigations that can occur from outside of the Defence Force. I'm just trying to understand all of this in its entirety.
Just to clarify that, Senator, the investigations won't be occurring outside of the Defence Force.
Sorry, by somebody outside of the Defence Force?
It will be somebody within the Defence Force. So if we're looking to appoint a civilian to undertake an investigation, they would be brought into our workforce as an Australian public servant within the Department of Defence.
Okay. So what sort of civilians would he be able to choose?
So typically we'd be looking to, if we were looking to expand those undertaking investigations, so if we choose to do so, noting there is discretion there, then we would look to, for example, employ or establish a number of public servant positions in the military policing units across Defence, recruit to those positions, as I said, most likely seeking people with expertise in particular niche areas, like former state and territory police officers, who may then wish to bring those existing skill sets into Defence.
Why civilian and not enlisted?
Civilians, as in, sorry, you're talking about why we're not using our enlisted workforce?
You're effectively contracting people in from outside instead of upskilling the people within the defence. Well, as you said, you've got an extraordinary amount of expertise. Most of the people that enlist to be in the military police actually come from the police force themselves. So why are you contracting this in instead of upskilling people if you don't have those skills?
Military police investigators include our enlisted workforce, so they are part of that investigation cohort and they're skilled and qualified to undertake those investigations. There are occasions, though, where certain skill sets are not exercised frequently or regularly in defence, and where we would benefit from having somebody with a particular expertise that has more exposure and experience in a particular type of investigation. So this just provides us that opportunity. It's not taking work away from our enlisted workforce. They are already part of our military policing and they're already part of our military policing investigators.
Just seems to me that the example that you raised before was, responding to allegations of sexual violence. We just heard that we're having an inquiry into that at the end of the year, which is looking like it's going to take about 12 months to do. And surely that's something that needs to be embedded within the investigations, the JMPU. So I'm failing to understand why that has to be coming from outside the system rather than inside here.
I'll just add a bit to that, Senator, and I think this also gets to the heart of the bill around timeliness measures. It takes a long time to undertake investigations, and investigations are becoming increasingly complex within defence, as they are externally because of technology and a range of other reasons as well. So any additional resourcing that we can bring to bear within defence to help with the speed of those investigations is a positive measure in that regard.
So and we're talking about investigating officers here, but you have those already on base. The investigating officers sort of oversee the investigation, and then you pull in the expert advice. That already happens. So why are we changing that now? Why are we taking that investigating officer role off somebody on base and giving it to somebody from the outside?
Are you talking about the summary contravention system now, Senator, where we are actually taking away the criminal prosecution and evidence requirement from that system?
No, I'm talking about, the Act defines an investigating officer. It's changing the definition of the investigating officer. So it's opening the door to a civilian person overseeing the investigations rather than being the expert that contributes to the investigation.
Yeah, it increases the volume of personnel and trained personnel that we have available to conduct investigations. That's essentially what this provides us, is more opportunity and more choice to enable growth in that workforce.
Do we not have enough MPs? Is that what you're saying?
No, we do have enough MPs, Senator. They undertake a range of functions, both general policing functions. They undertake functions in the military operational side of the house as well. And of course, one of their functions includes investigations.
That's right. They're trained in investigations. So again, I'm trying to understand why we are delegating investigations outside of the system here.
Yeah, so Senator, we're not delegating them outside of the system. They will be inside of the system. They'll be under the control of the Joint Military Police Force, and they'll be part of the Joint Military Police Force, not secondary or subsidiary to it, if we choose to undertake this or enact this part of the Act, and it will supplement and reinforce both the skill sets and the staffing numbers of our military police investigators.
Okay. Who can the CDF delegate his authority to appoint investigating officers to?
Okay.
I don't have that just off the top of my head. I think it is any civilian, but again, it'd be CDF applying judgment in terms of appropriate people to perform that role with the skills, training, and competence to perform that role.
Okay. Can a serving member, this is with the Mental Health Tribunal, can a serving member refuse to be referred to the Mental Health Tribunal, or is that a decision made by Defence?
My understanding is once a referral is made or a decision is made and a referral is made, that would be non-voluntary in terms of that, but there would be appeal rights and review rights in relation to that. Again, many of the details here will need to be developed in regulations and other subordinate instruments, which would obviously be reviewable as they're being developed over time.
All right, final question from me before Chair moves the call on. Could the tribunal be given a defence member's medical records without their consent?
I'm uncertain on that one at the moment. If it would be possible to take that one on notice, I can provide a more detailed answer on that point.
Thank you very much, Commodore. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Senator Lambie.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say it would be nice if you actually knew your bill before you come in front of the Senate. Or you could actually, if Defence, they've got more than enough officers out there, could actually send somebody in that knows the bill. Okay, I want to go into service police. I want to know how many, I'm not sure you call them 315s anymore. I want to know how many investigators you've actually got in service police that are fully qualified. That's the investigators. And then I want to know how many, couple of hundred or 300 service police you've got out here. Okay, but I want to know what's the exact number, and you should know that straight off the cuff. How many qualified service police do you have that are investigators that have done those extra courses?
Senator Lambie, I don't have that actual number on me available today. All members of the Joint Military Police Unit, though, are qualified investigators. They may not all be posted into a position that is undertaking an investigative function.
No, they're extra. No, absolutely not. You do extra courses. You're either general duty or you do extra courses. So don't tell me you're all investigator qualified by doing a week of training. That is not how it works. Don't you dare. Because this has been a problem for years when it comes to service police. Because my problem is this. I want to know, if you are so specialised and you know your stuff so well, why hasn't Defence got a specialised sexual abuse unit? Why don't you have one? Why are you going outside and relying on army reservists that are AFP or military reservists that are AFP or ex-policing? Why haven't you established that unit inside?
So, Senator Lambie, within the Joint Military Police Unit, we do have a specialised unit called the Sexual Offence Response Team. That is staffed by investigators who have higher levels of qualifications specific to sexual violence. We have teams.
How many investigators?
The team varies depending on where it is. That team is also comprised of social workers who are specialists in sexual violence to provide support to victim survivors during the process. We have teams across Australia, and we've increased those teams over the last 2 years, focusing on the locations where we know there is a higher likelihood of harm, being at our ab initio training as well. So those sexual offence response teams have been in place for some years now, and are continuing to expand.
How many cases have they seen in 2 years? How many cases have you done and completed in a 2-year period since that?
Senator Lambie, every sexual violence report that is made to Defence, regardless of whether it is investigated in the civil and criminal system or within Defence, the victim survivor has the opportunity to engage with the SORT team. So they engage with every known report that is made within Defence.
Yeah, okay.
And they
not working.
They provide that support to the victim survivor and will
How
also...
many? How many in 2 years? That's not the questions I asked you. I asked you how many have gone through that in 2 years?
Senator Lambie, just let the witness finish and then you can answer with a follow-up.
So, Senator Lambie, our data around the number of reports that are made to Defence around sexual violence are annually published in the Defence Annual Report. So those figures are publicly available. That includes, of course, both victim survivors who are military and also accused perpetrators who are military. So those numbers are publicly available. Of course, if we do not have visibility of a matter because a victim survivor has chosen to not make a report, or is engaging directly in the civil scheme without our knowledge, we of course can't capture that information, but that data is publicly available.
Okay, so do you know what the data is off the top of your head for the past 2 years?
No, Senator Lambie, off the top of my head, I do not have that information available as it relates to this bill.
Okay, well, can we find that? Can we also find out how many charged and what ranks they are on that stuff that have been involved in that unit?
The Defence Annual Report includes the outcomes and the status of each and every one of those reports of sexual violence over the last 5 years of data, and the next Defence Annual Report will include an additional breakdown of demographic data by both victim, survivor and perpetrator, by rank and service, and further demographic breakdown in a way that it still protects the anonymity of those who are impacted.
Okay, so this is what I gather. So since 2011, we've had the Skype scandal. We've had more Australian Defence Force Academy scandals. They happen yearly. Shocking, absolutely shocking. You should probably put that specialised sexual unit down there. We've had, what else have we had? There's obviously been other scandals. You've had the DART. So you've had the Defence Abuse Response Task Force. We've had payouts from the Ombudsman from 2016, I think, and it's finished now, if that be correct. We estimate at about since 2012, there should have been about 7,500 reports. How close are we with that? Because I can't understand why you've got a class action going against you when it comes to abuse and what's going on from a law firm out there that's now collected over 3,000 women and still climbing from early 2013. So do your figures match those figures of what's going on in that lawsuit against you?
Yeah, so Senator Lambie, I of course can't speak about that lawsuit given it is before.
You can talk about the numbers. Does your numbers match, do your complaints match what that lawsuit done? Because if they did not, you are failing. You are failing and you're sitting here yapping and no action's been taken.
So, Senator Lambie, we know that there are barriers to reporting within Defence and we know that there are levels of underreporting because our anonymous surveys do tell us that, and we, of course, track that longitudinally over time as well. So we're aware that there is a gap and we recognise that some of those barriers to reporting do relate to trust and confidence both in command but in the military justice system as well. And that's why this bill introduces some important support and transparency measures to aim to increase the confidence of the victim survivors that they will continue to come forward and will see that they will be supported through the military justice system and that justice will proceed in this forum. So the bill does introduce a number of measures that relate specifically to sexual violence aimed at improving workplace protections for victims and ensuring that perpetrators are held to account.
How can we possibly trust you or believe anything you are saying when that DART was finished in 2015 and you haven't done one damn thing? One damn thing in 11 years. As a matter of fact, the only reason you have moved now is because you very well, I had a defence abuse bill myself that has been sitting there and down at the drafters. Who decided to do the bill and when did the bill start and who drafted it?
So, Senator Lambie, the components of this bill have been under development for some time. Obviously, the...
Since when? At what time? What time?
There are 5...
What time was that?
Let Senator Lambie, just let the witness answer.
There were 5 recommendations in the Royal Commission that are going to be partially or fully implemented by this bill. Some of the work associated with those recommendations had commenced either during or prior to the Royal Commission, and the commissioners identified that and reflected that back to us in a recommendation to support the prioritisation of that work. Some of the recommendations and the component of this bill commenced when we received the Royal Commission's final report, but some of the recommendations from this bill arose from other reviews and inquiries, including JAG recommendations, IGADF recommendations, Director of Military Prosecution recommendations, an outstanding finding from the Defence Abuse Response Tribunal, and some recommendations from the Commonwealth Ombudsman. That work was well underway. This has provided us an opportunity to get this into a single bill and have it prioritised through Parliament for the first time.
Okay, if you could just pass all that documentation over the last 10 years on all that stuff that you I want to see. Did you have a committee doing this in defence? Has it just been thrown around? Because I can't understand why since 2011, basically since we all knew this had blown out of the water, since, God, let's not go into Lewin or anything like that, since all that's been brought, that it is now 2026 and you are finally doing something about it. I find that totally embarrassing, and you are just sitting there, with all due respect, you are using excuses. It has taken me 10 months to do a bill, and I don't have the department that you do. So, Senator, and you want trust from us. You want us to trust you.
Okay, Senator, please don't yell at the witness.
Please tell me once again, how do we trust you?
So, Senator,
how does that build trust and confidence into your system? Why don't you tell us that?
So, Senator,
you've asked your question, Senator. Let's just hear from the witness.
Yeah, so Senator, I will answer your question about how this operates within Defence. So Defence, the accountable authority for military justice, has been the Vice Chief of Defence Force for some years. That transitioned to the Chief of Personnel upon the establishment of that appointment. Defence has had a military justice steering group for some years now, and that is the forum that is responsible for prioritising, identifying risks to the military justice system and prioritising both policy and legislative work to go forward. That steering group reports to the Chiefs of Service Committee and to the Chief of Defence Force itself. The work that has been undertaken by that steering group has contributed to this bill and has been underway, depending on the part of the bill, for some time. The evidence of the development and contribution towards the implementation of the Royal Commission recommendations has and will continue to be put to the DVSC to enable their independent oversight and assurance of the work that we have undertaken to date.
Okay, we've known this has been going on for years, so one, can you just be honest with us? Why has it taken so long? Why? So, Senator, it's been going on for years without the Royal Commission. You give those poor people out there that have been through that system and are having to live with this, they're listening to you. So why don't you tell them why it's taken Defence so long when it takes Jackie Lambie all of 10 months and it's sitting there on the notice paper ready to go? Why has it taken you so long?
So, Senator Lambie, as I advised, there have been also other reforms and other legislative reforms, including to the defence regulations, that have come about during that time as well. This provided us...
Those reforms have failed. Those reforms have failed. That's why you're at a class action. So that they have failed, those reforms. Once again, you've got to kick up the butt because Lambie's doing the work for you, the bill, and all of a sudden Defence jumps in.
Senator Lambie, just let the witness finish.
I think what the committee would like to know is who wrote the bill, who had input into the bill, who spent the most time on the bill. Has it been Defence, the AG? Has it been the IGADF?
No, Senator, it has not been the IGADF. All the military justice entities were, of course, consulted during the development of the bill, noting that that has not all occurred in a linear fashion. Some work was already well developed. Other work had to commence from scratch. The bill was developed in consultation with external entities, including the AGS, other government departments as well, and of course wide wargaming and consultation with those members most likely to be impacted by the content of the bill, including commanders, consideration of both commanders in Australia and on warlike operations, and of course our enlisted members heavily participated in those wargaming actions as well.
Wargaming actions, that's a new word. What exactly does wargaming actions mean when you're talking about abuse?
So Senator, for example, if we were looking to introduce a new mechanism like the summary contravention scheme, working through in a desktop situation with all the people that might be involved in that scheme and going through step by step what that would look like, what it would mean, getting their views on how that would translate into a real world, real military on the ground, not just a Canberra legal-centric perspective.
Okay.
Yep. Question, Senator Lambie.
I just wanted to ask a couple of questions about the mental health tribunal. I want to talk to you about the mental health tribunal. Should it be required to consider whether defence itself, from command decisions, work culture, or institutional failures, contributed to a member's mental health condition? Is all that being looked at?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator Lambie. And we've, of course, seen the submission that was made that speaks specifically about institutional causation. So while the Defence Mental Health Tribunal itself is intended to treat individual cases and it's dealing with individuals and not institutional causation, there are other mechanisms, for example, through procedural fairness mechanisms, that do provide the opportunity for the accused to bring to bear, to identify and articulate other mitigating factors that they may choose to, such as institutional causation. If those matters are put forward through that standard routine process that exists, then they can, of course, be considered. But that's not the purpose of the Mental Health Tribunal. The Mental Health Tribunal is about the individual and their existing mental health and ensuring that they are not penalised or punished unnecessarily or disciplined if that is not in their best interest or in the interest of defence. In terms of mitigating factors, the individual is still able to bring those forward.
And how many full-time psychiatrists does the military actually have that work on basis full-time, 5 days a week?
So I don't have that information available, Senator, but we do intend to rely on state and territory mental health infrastructure to support the treatment and secure care for our individuals, because we do not operate forensic mental health facilities because of the low numbers in defence, and particularly because of the low numbers of referrals for this that are expected. So establishing defence facilities would not be practical or efficient, and that's why the next step, if this legislation is passed, is to then commence and continue that engagement with states and territories.
Yeah, I guess my thing is we're coming back to the failure of defence, and they're psychiatrists. Okay, if you're pushing them out that way, you're not getting them before they go through the net, are you? What's their mental health been like for the last 2 years that you've turned a blind eye to? That's what I'm getting to. So who's going to be responsible for that stuff? Who's responsible for that happening? Okay, this looks like a bit of a mess, really, doesn't it? I have no further questions. I'll pass on the call. If there's any room at the end, I'll ask some then, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Look, I might just ask a couple. Can I just turn you to the historical consensual homosexual convictions that fall within the legislation or the bill? So hoping you can tell me more about how the extinguishment of these convictions will work.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. So we, of course, recognise that the historical policies relating to homosexuality have caused significant harm to affected personnel, and we remain committed to removing discriminatory, outdated and legally inconsistent provisions within this Act, ensuring alignment with contemporary Australian law and community expectations. So in terms of the proposed process, we have modelled this off the New South Wales homosexual offence extinguishment provisions, and we're proposing a process that aims to restore dignity, that will still provide procedural fairness and recognise service while mitigating risk and harm. So the intent is that a person who was convicted of a historical homosexual service offence would have the opportunity to apply for their conviction to be extinguished, and that can either be the affected person or a person with a special interest to submit an application that includes sufficient information to identify the relevant conviction and confirm the affected person's identity. Then it will be referred for assessment, and if extinguished, the applicant will be provided with formal written confirmation for use with other entities that may hold records of the conviction. The intent is the affected member will be allowed to retain a copy of their record, but that the record itself is effectively sealed and not destroyed, but that it cannot be used for any of the purposes set out in the legislation. That enables the affected person to still rely on the details in that record to support their own needs, including for applications in respect of compensation for harm suffered as a result of that conviction. Now, we have received the question about making this an automatic extinguish of the homosexual convictions. By making this an application process, it ensures that only discriminatory convictions, being those that would constitute those that would not constitute an offence if the conduct had been between persons of different sexes, are eligible for extinguishment. This ensures that convictions involving non-consensual or abusive or otherwise improper conduct that would still be considered offence today are not eligible for extinguishment.
Okay. In terms of then the bill itself, I also note that the bill will try and solve, I guess how we describe it, an inherently legislative problem here, that the defence is working to ensure that those members who were administratively separated for similar behaviour will also have the opportunity to apply to have their records amended. Is that the case? Can you just confirm and maybe just clarify that for me?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And of course, we did notice this in a number of the submissions to this committee as well. So while this bill deals with the Defence Force Discipline Act, and amendments to that Act can only address disciplinary matters and cannot directly address administrative actions, we do of course recognise that a number of individuals were administratively or medically discharged, and we are separately considering additional measures relevant to historical administrative separations, and we do recognise the continuing stakeholder interest in this issue.
Can you also explain for me, though, how important, I guess, from what you've seen, just not just submissions, but your other consultations or engagements with the LGBTI community have been with respect to the historical offences?
Yeah, thank you. So Defence has engaged and is engaged with multiple of those external service organisations, including through DVA, about the changes, and we are also progressing a really specific communications policy. We recognise the harm that has occurred because of this legislation in the past, and as I said, we do recognise that there is other work that we need to do in this space, particularly in the administrative side of the House.
What other additional work do you think needs to be done, both administratively, I guess, and probably alongside this, the changes that have been put forward by the community, by the government that will better support members of the LGBTI community?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the additional considerations we're making outside of this bill for those members who underwent an administrative separation, the way that we would likely look to undertake that work would be an amendment to the Defence regulations to introduce a new mode of disclosure to recognise the discriminatory nature of the way those individuals were administratively separated. That Defence regulation is sunsetting in October, so we could bring about that effect by the end of this calendar year. I would say at the same time, there are existing mechanisms in place to address the harm resulting from a member's service and to provide compensation. And we do recommend and encourage that those individuals contact DVA to access the assistance that relates to their particular circumstances. For this particular bill, though, the extinguishment of a service conviction may provide those former members with the evidence they require to re-engage with those existing compensation schemes. So the changes proposed in this bill will not remove any existing common law or statutory rights that the member may have in respect of compensation or restoration for the harm suffered.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Senator Cox, I think you've got some questions, and then I think the other senators also some follow-up before we finish for the day. Senator Cox.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And just some quick questions. I understand the bill amends some service offences that remove the requirement that offences that occurred on service land. Can you explain to the committee why, what's the reason for removing that requirement?
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. So the bill amends two service offences, assault under section 33 and assault occasioning bodily harm under section 33 alpha, by removing the jurisdictional limitation that the conduct must occur on service land in a service ship, aircraft or vehicle, and also extending this offence to include harassment. So updating these offences would reflect the latest High Court jurisprudence on the limits of disciplinary jurisdiction, which specifically further strengthens the ability of defence to take decisive action against family, domestic and sexual violence where it may not be perpetrated on service land. I would note, however, that the conduct must still be linked to the need to maintain and enforce service discipline as a precondition for the use of the discipline system, and there therefore must be a legitimate impact upon the good order and discipline of the Defence Force still before proceeding with disciplinary action.
Great, thank you very much. Can you also explain to the committee why amendments are required for military police to carry and use certain equipment?
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. So this particular measure in the bill is an efficiency and a transparency measure, which enables the same equipment to be used by military police across all state and territory jurisdictions that they operate within, noting, however, that the conditions and circumstances of carriage and use can still be limited through ministerial direction. Currently, our military police use equipment, but it requires individual legislative change across each state and territory, which impacts the ability of our military police to operate uniformly within Australia and within our defence establishment. So this measure replaces the current requirement for individual agreements in respect of military policing equipment. I will note that the equipment that they use mirrors the equipment used by civilian military police, and they receive the same training on that equipment, and only those who are trained are authorised to carry and use that equipment.
Great, thank you very much. And how do you expect these changes to benefit current serving ADF members?
The changes regarding military equipment, Senator?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, it will ensure that we have consistency of the way in which our military police operate across Australia, and that they have the same training in place, the same oversights in place, and that they are able to operate on defence land using the same equipment, regardless of where they are posted at any point in time.
That's great. And also the other change would be helpful around the amendment to service offences. Happy for you to take that on notice if you didn't have that in front of you.
Sorry, Senator, you're talking about the benefits of the summary offence changes?
Yes, that's
right. Okay, so thank you. So as I sort of spoke to earlier, this simplifies and streamlines our ability to respond to and deal with what are considered minor disciplinary matters under an administrative type of framework, preventing unnecessary escalation and minimising the time that our members are subject to the military justice system. It aligns with contemporary expectations and enables matters to be resolved more promptly without taking away the rights of the accused to escalate so they should choose, and without taking away any of the procedural fairness elements or the supports that will still exist to support them in place.
That's great. Thank you very much for that information to the committee. That's it for me. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Deputy Chair.
Thank you very much. I just want to elaborate on the Defence Minister's new powers to initiate prosecutions, and I'm just going to very quickly read out the text that will be inserted into the bill. And it says, the Minister may, after consultation with the Director of Military Prosecutions and the Judge Advocate General, give written directions or guidelines to the Director about the performance of the Director's functions or exercise of the Director's powers. Now, aside from aligning the Defence Minister's power with what the Attorney-General has over the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions, why has this power been given to the Defence Minister? What is the problem that it's seeking to fix?
It's I think it was identifying a gap in the law, which meant that, unlike the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions, there wasn't a similar level of ministerial level control or influence that could be applied in terms of guidelines or directions and the like. Again, it was, I think, a gap in the law, and one that's been sought to be filled through this mechanism, which aligns it with the processes that are applicable with the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions.
Okay, thank you. What's the oversight mechanism of the Defence Minister in who he or she chooses to prosecute?
Sorry, Senator, are you asking what the oversight of the Minister is in determining who the Director of Military Prosecutions may choose to prosecute?
No, who the Defence Minister chooses to prosecute in the ADF. What's the oversight mechanism for that?
Yes, Senator, I think I said earlier I would clarify, and it also calls for an opinion in terms of the question of whether it does empower the Minister to give such a direction to prosecute on an individual basis. So, as I said, I'll seek to clarify that, but it would be, I would imagine, just the normal political process and accountability to Parliament for the Minister.
Okay, because it does say that the Minister may, after consultation with the DMP, direct the DMP to exercise its powers. So the Minister can direct the DMP to prosecute people. So if we can understand what the oversight mechanism of that is, because the Minister is inherently a political person, political position, so therefore it could be a political decision.
Aside from my answer just previously, I'll need to take that one on notice in terms of an oversight framework or structure in relation to that, but I think it is inherently the accountability to Parliament.
Okay, because 2A says that it may relate to the circumstances in which the Director should institute or carry on prosecutions for service offences. So the Minister can direct the DMP to prosecute somebody for a service offence.
Yeah. I've seen that in the past, I've understood them to be, as they apply in the civilian realm, applicable to classes or types of cases, not to specific matters, and that's the reason I wanted to just provide that clarification on that exact point on notice, if I could, please.
Okay. Does the Minister have to justify or rely on any advice or criteria when ordering the DMP to prosecute an ADF member, or does he just have to consult the DMP?
I think the obligation is to consult. That's plain on the words.
Okay. Section 6 of Part 10 appears to give the Minister the ability to direct the DMP without disclosing it to Parliament. So what oversight mechanism exists to monitor the Defence Minister's use of this power? So basically, the bill sets up that he doesn't have to disclose it to Parliament, therefore he doesn't have to make it public. So what kind of oversight mechanisms can we have over these decisions?
I'll need to take that one on notice. I don't have the detail on that one.
Okay, so it's possible that we could never know that the Minister directs the DMP to prosecute a particular person.
Yeah. Senator, we're not in a position to advise whether that's possible or not. We'll take that one on notice.
Thank you very much. Ms Mackay, I might give you a question. The DVSC has expressed concern that including offending by a lower rank against a higher rank risks the abuse of positional authority. Can you just elaborate on that, please? Why you think offending by a lower rank risks diminishing the specific aggravating factor the Royal Commission intended to address?
Yes, thanks for the question, Senator. This is in relation to the Royal Commission recommendation 20, which is around sentencing considerations. And the harm that they were trying to address was this positional authority as an aggravating feature of sentencing. And so, in reality, that's a higher rank using their positional authority in committing an offence against a lower rank. And the provision does do that, but it also extends to a lower rank committing an offence against a higher rank. And for me, that was a concern in relation to it's not about positional authority. It goes beyond what the Royal Commission recommended, and I think runs the risk potentially of diminishing the aggravating feature that it was trying to address.
Okay, and do you have concerns by equating general rank disparity with positional power imbalances, the military justice system might fail to properly penalise the systemic risks faced by vulnerable junior members?
Well, I think it does. It may not just aim at the harm it was trying to address. So, in terms of expanding the aggravating factors to include the lower rank committing an offence against a higher rank, doesn't actually target the harm it was meant to be targeted at.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks a lot, Deputy Chair. Now, Senator Lambie.
Thank you very much. I'll just go to defence. Actually, Commissioner, while I've got you, I'll just ask you. Your submission notes that the bill introduces non-disclosure orders for service convictions, even though that mechanism was not recommended by the Royal Commission and may not be consistent with civilian jurisdictions. In your view, does this risk undermining the transparency the Royal Commission was seeking to achieve in relation to the military justice convictions?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Yes, the Royal Commission Recommendation 23 was aimed at ensuring military convictions for sexual offences and related offences like stalking and intimate image abuse are recorded in civilian criminal histories. What the provision that's proposed in this bill does is introduce both a discretionary non-disclosure order, which wasn't envisaged in the recommendation made by the Royal Commission. So in those circumstances, it provides a discretion to enable not a conviction for an offence not to be passed on to the civilian criminal histories. And to us, that went further than the Royal Commission recommended.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll come to defence now in reference to your non-disclosures. How are the community safety implications assessed when making such orders? Do you know what that would look like?
Yes, Senator Lambie. If I can firstly just explain the difference between civilian jurisdiction and military jurisdiction. Because, of course, if a member of the ADF is accused of a serious criminal offence, that matter will rightly fall within the jurisdiction of civilian authorities. There are, of course, cases where civilian criminal jurisdictions are not available to prosecute offending, and some of those are then prosecuted within the discipline system, which, of course, is not a criminal system, it is a disciplinary system. And, of course, matters in respect of the more serious offences are only dealt with under the DFDA in defence with the consent of the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions. So as you would be aware, Senator, prosecutions for service offences do have a lower threshold than civilian criminal prosecutions because they're focused on service interest and discipline rather than in the criminal space. We, of course, agree that disclosing service convictions to civilian authorities is a positive and necessary step, and ensuring that people and military people who commit serious civilian or service offences are treated similarly and that community safety is protected And this reform gives effect to what has been a long-standing recommendation from the JAG. But as is the case in civilian criminal jurisdictions, automatic disclosure is not always appropriate, and non-disclosure orders provide an important safeguard in circumstances where disclosure would have disproportionate or unintended impacts. There are a number of service offences, like being absent without leave, that would not be appropriate for somebody to have on a civilian criminal record, and therefore it is appropriate that non-disclosure provisions do exist and they align with comparable civilian approaches.
But it is not fair when non-disclosures have been reached to cover the hierarchies behind, which is what we're seeing, and this is what's going. You are now losing that case with the case that's going on now with all the abuse. Yeah. Okay, you're not going to get away with this non-disclosure anymore where people's names. And my question is this to you. Are you really going to be transparent? Because this is what our bother is. Is it possible that a non-disclosure order could be imposed to not disclose the conviction of a perpetrator of sexual assault? Because those non-disclosures have been used in the past.
Yeah, so Senator, that's a... Yeah. So the non-disclosure orders that you are mentioning are agreements that are reached outside of a service conviction or military prosecution matter between two members through a law firm. What we're talking about here is the decision maker, being the Judge Advocate General's decision to either disclose that service conviction to the National Police Reference System for inclusion on somebody's criminal record. Whether two individuals have a non-disclosure order agreement in place or not is a separate matter and does not impact this. It is appropriate, and we do agree it's appropriate, for service convictions that are likely to have resulted in a conviction record if heard by a civil court to be included in the National Police Reference System, and therefore that individual then has a criminal record in layperson's terms.
I have to say, I don't think the digger's going to trust that one at all. Okay, just because of your past. The past, it's not really helpful. I'm not sure how you're expecting trust from us anymore because of past, now you want to continue non-disclosures. Yeah, we've seen what happens with them. It means the perpetrator up the top, which is usually the higher ranked person and sometimes highly ranked, nothing actually happens to them.
Yeah, Senator,
does it?
The decision to either disclose that record to the National Police Reference System or not is undertaken during the sentencing. It is undertaken by the Judge Advocate General, and it is also subject to review. And Defence has...
So it's decided by the military itself? That's who the Judge Advocate belongs to. Once again, they'll be doing their own homework and ticking off whether or not that will go out or not. So we haven't moved any way forward in this area. We haven't moved forward. You're not giving us any more trust in the system.
Senator, we are aligning with the sentencing practices applied in the ACT. We have worked closely with the ACT and with others in this space to ensure that we are aligned. We have also worked closely with the owners of the National Police Reference System, the ACIC, to ensure that the information that we are providing to them meets their requirements in terms of the security and safety checks that information is used for.
Okay, and I guess if you're serious or not, I mean, you've got 18 recommendations of the Royal Commission by ensuring that alleged victims are not required to work alongside alleged perpetrators while an investigation is underway. Can you clarify whether these provisions apply retrospectively with what is going on there now? Are these going to be fixed? If this bill gets through, are you going to go after those perpetrators and remove them and fix the issues that are sitting there today? Or just the new ones that come in? How serious are you at cleaning this up? Yes. Is it retrospective?
So, Senator, that recommendation relates to amendments that were made to the defence regulations in December of last year, and that regulation is retrospective.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll just come back to the Commissioner if I can. Have you had time to have a look at this non-disclosure orders applying, obviously, if they apply for a serious sexual or violent service offence, and if so, what community safety tests, safeguards should Parliament require before such a conviction is withheld from the National Police records?
So we've had a chance to look at the bill, just as the committee has, and what we noticed were the two sort of limitations that were put around the recording or passing on of convictions between the military system and the civilian system. And that was, firstly, that it only applies to superior tribunal convictions. So only superior tribunal convictions can be passed on between the military system and the civilian system. And then there is that discretionary non-disclosure order. We point to those only to raise the point that the committee might like to consider whether that achieves the intent of the Royal Commission, which was to ensure that all military convictions for sexual offences and related offences like stalking and intimate image abuse are actually passed on to the civilian system. So that's why we raised the point, Senator.
Okay, thank you. And I just have one more for defence. I just wanted to clear up the matter about service police, military police. I just want to, let me get this right. Military police, service police, this is what you've changed, have you? As military police, I can now go to a civilian house if there is domestic abuse and I can use my powers there. Is that what you're telling me? Because I cannot use my powers unless I'm on a married quarter house or on base, and it belongs to the Commonwealth. Because I don't think I heard you right, because I don't think that's the case. Unless you're up-training us finally, after all this time, you're going to train us to civilian police qualification. We actually can't do that. And I'm not sure how you get away with that in the law.
So, Senator Lambie, that amendment to the bill is around those behaviours occurring off service land can still be considered for disciplinary action under the DFDA.
Okay, but you can't send them out there. You can't actually send service police out there and deal with this. It's got to be done by civilian police.
It would depend if it was an access to, it was effectively a non-consensual or forceful access to the land. There will be legal restrictions in terms of its investigation or response. But in terms of the jurisdiction to hold a member accountable for their actions off service land, this opens up the aperture in terms of providing a consistent application of those laws in terms of whether it's on service land or off service land.
Okay.
There are some limited powers in respect of the capacities now in relation to the Regulatory Powers Act, which was enabled within Defence a few years back. But they're quite limited at the moment. But they have been an expansion in terms of the capacity to conduct investigations off service land.
But you're right, Senator, this isn't about giving military policing more powers off service land. But of course, we have existing legal authorities where if civilian police are investigating a matter involving a Defence member, and if lawful to do so, can share that information with Defence to enable us to then use that evidence to prosecute or charge under the DFDA.
I do. I'll just ask a question. I do understand that, but I'm just trying to clear up the action. There is nothing. You can charge them once that's happened, but you can't go out and charge them in a civilian house as such. You can't go in there and bowl your way out through a door. You can't do that. You have to bring in civilian police to help you. I just want to clear that up so service police know what's going on. If they're not on a married quarter, if they don't belong to the Commonwealth, they don't belong to Defence housing, and they're not on base, they do not have the right to go and enter your... If you're in a private home, they do not have the right to go and knock at your door and bail it in. They don't have that legal jurisdiction.
No, you're right.
Can you just clear that up for me?
No, you're quite correct, Senator. They don't. There are only limited powers that military policing have from an off-base perspective.
So nothing's changed. Okay, we still take a civilian police officer with us. That's it. So I don't. Right. Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Deputy Chair, you've got one question, I understand.
Yeah, I do.
Before
and
we wrap up.
Yeah, given it's 12:46, I'll just put it on notice. I'm just coming back to the international element, and I'm just wondering, the civilian ADF can't be deployed. Is that correct?
Sorry, what do you mean by civilian ADF?
Well, civilian.
A public servant?
Yeah.
A public servant can be deployed if they are considered a defence civilian, and they then can come under the accountability of the Defence Force Discipline Act.
Okay, so they could go and do international investigations.
Yes.
Okay, and would the civilian ADF, the investigative officer, the civilian one appointed by the ADF,
the public servant,
have the authority to direct uniformed personnel?
No, they would not. Unless it was part of their investigative powers to collect evidence. When you say direct military personnel, is that what you mean, Senator?
Yes. So if they're overseeing an investigation, you'd have military personnel serving within that investigation. Would the civilian then have the authority to direct the military personnel working underneath it in its team?
Senator, there are capacities, like they would not be able to exercise military command, but Defence is an integrated organisation, and there are capacities for ADF personnel to issue lawful and reasonable directions to their APS staff, and as well as for APS supervisors to issue lawful and reasonable directions to ADF members. So there are frameworks within the department, those normal ones that would work day to day, but there's no special different arrangement that would arise in relation to these activities here that I am aware of.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it from me. They don't have to go on notice now because they've been answered. Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that indulgence. Thank you very much for appearing today.
All right. On that note, thank you, everyone. That does conclude today's hearing. But if you did have any questions taken on notice, please provide an answer by the 21st of July. I want to thank everyone who's appeared today, to Hansard and Broadcasting for their assistance. And on that note, the committee now stands adjourned. Thanks, everyone.